Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Global Technology Summit Innovation Dialogue 2024, co-hosted by Carnegie India and the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. I'm Kanika Monga, Senior Coordinator, Strategy and Communications at Carnegie India. We are excited to be in Bengaluru, and this evening we have an interesting lineup of speakers exploring topics such as digital public infrastructure, artificial intelligence, and their roles in fostering inclusive growth and tech partnerships. We would now like to take a moment to thank our co-hosts and partners. We are privileged to organize the Global Technology Summit Innovation Dialogue with the Ministry of External Affairs as co-host. In particular, we appreciate the support of the Policy Planning and Research Division led by Sri S. Raghuram. We are deeply grateful to Tata Trust, our philanthropy partner, Microsoft, Salesforce, Meta, and Google, our dialogue partners, and AkeStep, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Center for Digital Public Infrastructure, Future of Privacy Forum, Center for Open Societal Systems, and Co-Develop, our knowledge partners. We request you to please keep your mobile phones on silent, but do encourage you to use social media to comment and contribute to our conversation online. Please stay connected to social media via hashtag GTS Innovation Dialogue. I would now like to invite Rudra Chaudhary, Director of Carnegie India, to deliver the opening remarks.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the GTS Innovation Dialogue. I was going to thank a lot of our supporters and things, and Kanika's already done that, so I can move on. But I just want to reiterate and thank our co-hosts. We formally run the GTS, and what this is, called the GTS Innovation Dialogue, with the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. And it's really fortuitous, I think, that we're doing this today. On the 9th of October, 1946, the Indian Foreign Service was created, which then, after independence, migrated into the Ministry of External Affairs. So to my friends and diplomats from the IFS over here and those beaming in from different parts of the world, a very happy IFS day. And I was just thinking, when I was thinking about this day back in 1946, I was saying, when they created the IFS, I was just wondering, is it the founding kind of individuals then, what were they thinking when it came to, say, innovation and technology? And obviously in the 1950s, there was a very rich history of this connection between diplomacy and technology, which equaled many things, institutions, space. But I think the dynamic today is just very different and very evident, especially when you're here in Bengaluru. So how did we get here and who are we? Just very quickly, we're Carnegie India. We're a think tank. We're a research-driven, independent think tank. I'm going to spare you the details on what we do. Please check out our website. But essentially, we focus on three areas: political economy, security, and technology. And over the last many years, technology has become our biggest build-out. I also want to situate what this innovation dialogue is about. In 2016, the year that we were founded in India, the then Foreign Secretary, Dr. S. Jaishankar, the current External Affairs Minister, had this idea where he said, look, there's a gap in the market. We require some kind of a bridge, a policy bridge, if you like, that connects technologists, diplomats, innovators, venture capitalists, academics and experts all under one roof. They need to be brainstorming the future, and if they don't, then we're going to get something wrong as far as the ministry is concerned. My understanding from, I only joined Carnegie in 2018, but my understanding from those who founded Carnegie was that was very much the thinking, and hence was created the Global Tech Summit, which is a slightly bigger affair than this in different ways. In December 2023, we ran our 8th edition of the GTS. But in the last couple of years, as we do the GTS, we do a lot of research, we work on various policy issues. The one thing we realized that we're missing something. And the part that we're missing, we realized, is a serious discussion on innovation. So not necessarily on the policy side of things, obviously the two are connected, but on innovation itself. And yet again, it was a meeting that I took in the ministry, in the PP&R division, where it was the current joint secretary said, hey, listen, why don't you just do this innovation dialogue? Let's get innovators and thinkers and people who build technology from different parts of the world. And I'm thrilled that we have 25 different representatives from think tanks, countries, digital departments, Prime Minister's office who are here with us today. to basically workshop and discuss the future of technologies. We also decided that for this iteration, which is the inaugural iteration, we'll focus on two kinds of technology, if you like, transformative in their own ways. Digital public infrastructure, which this audience in Bengaluru needs zero introduction on, and now I think it's fair to say the globe needs zero introduction on, and the second is on artificial intelligence. So we've just spent about 2.5 days in fairly intense, fairly deep discussions, and I think at some level managed to square away the conversation we had with the ministry in terms of why we were doing this, and perhaps the vision that Dr. Jaishankar and the founders of Carnegie India had back in 2016, which was to genuinely build an ecosystem under an umbrella where you have the builders, the visionaries, the technologists, the innovators, the startups, VCs, and as importantly, the academics, think tankers, and policymakers, essentially trying to figure out the path in the future of DPI and the current, present, and future of AI. So again, I just wanted to thank government representatives from Papua New Guinea to Morocco, from Nepal to Germany, think tankers from around the world for coming and spending this time, and I think there's no better place to kick this off than here in Bengaluru. Bengaluru is also very special to us. It was in this very room in 2016 that we started the GTS. So that journey started right here in this hotel, in this very room, and there are some people over here who've been part of this journey a lot longer than I. But there is no city in the world that is a better expression of the term ecosystem than in Bangalore. And I can say that we are one of the greatest beneficiaries of this idea, very innovative idea, called ecosystem. And I just want to call out and thank those in this ecosystem who have enriched our lives, expanded our visions, and expanded our universes in the way in which we think about technology, policy, not just from a purely academic perspective, but as importantly as a perspective of impact, which has kind of taught us to say is that there is some degree of causality when it comes to policy. This is not all ivory tower stuff. You can actually think of stuff and get it done as well. And I just want to point to 2-3 of our knowledge partners who've been kind of hugely inspirational in the way in which we have considered policy imperatives. The X-Step Foundation, and I want to thank Shankar Maruwada, the co-founder and the chief executive officer. CDPI, Pramod Varma and Kamya Chandra. I want to thank Rahul Mathan. He has no umbrella. I could say trilegal, but I don't know if that correctly, it does, okay. CV Madhukar and co-develop, and then many others. But I think these ecosystems have hopefully, without these ecosystems, we could not have done the workshops that we did yesterday and day before. In fact, without these ecosystems, I am absolutely certain, and for those who've been in the closed door, I should say, by the way, this is on the record. You're carried on cable TV, so I'll be a little careful. But without this ecosystem, a lot would not have happened even globally when it comes to some of the big technology projects. So thank you very much. With that, I have the distinct privilege of introducing our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Seth Center, who's the acting Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technology in the US State Department. Seth has worn many different hats. He served in the State Department policy planning staff. He's been the senior advisor to the National Security Commission on AI in the United States. He served in the National Security Council in the United States in helping write, I think basically mostly wrote the national security strategy. But interestingly, he's also a historian. He's also a think tanker. I think fair to say, Seth, you get what all of this is about, more than other officials. And we're just delighted that you could come and spend this time here, especially in Bengaluru. And if I can add, Seth is a very good friend to India. Dr. Seth Center, please.
Thanks, Rudy. I appreciate it. And it's a lot of pressure to be a part of an inaugural anything, especially when it involves innovation and a summit with a great tradition. So delighted to be here. Thrilled to be in Bengaluru. Huge amount of effort goes into this, so thanks to Carnegie and team for putting it on. Kindred spirits in the External Affairs Division who do policy planning, again, something that I'm fond of. The real question, though, is why I'm here and why we're here. And I ask that because on the plane here yesterday morning, I was talking to a DevOps guy, a software guy. He had a t-shirt on, and he was clearly a computer guy. And I explained I was from the State Department in the United States. And he says to me, we don't see any of you guys down here at all. And I said, then I'm going to the exact right place for the conversation that we need to have. Also on that plane, I did some very serious research on Google, and one of the first hits on Bengaluru and tech was an article titled Peak Bengaluru, where I learned that a hotel was employing a virtual AI assistant to check in guests. And I hope that is not the apex of AI or Bengaluru, but indicative of an innovative environment down here. I think equally indicative, yesterday I was meeting with some Karnataka state officials, one of whom corrected me when I said that this was the Silicon Valley of India, and she reminded me, in fact, that the ambition was that the Silicon Valley would be the Bengaluru of the West Coast of the United States, which I thought was exactly right in capturing both the talent and the ambition. Also talked to a biotech founder yesterday in a startup who explained that Bangalore and the Bay Area were two sides of the same coin. So you see this extraordinary coupling of talent, ambition, and a relationship between US innovators and Indian innovators. So I think that helps to explain the wisdom of bringing this conversation back here to Bengaluru, but it still doesn't answer the question of why we're here. And I think we're here for the same reason that many governments now pass through Silicon Valley, and that is, as a wise person once told me, that even if technology firms are not interested in geopolitics, geopolitics are certainly very interested in technology. And the bigger picture there, of course, is one that was very clear just a few weeks ago in Wilmington, Delaware, on the geopolitical front, where Presidents Modi and Biden called their relationship the defining partnership of the 21st century that is decisively delivering and serving the public good in the world. And of course, that's the real story of the intersection of the United States, India, and technology, where in reality, as all of us have experienced, some with more forethought than others, Carnegie being on the leading edge, that tech is integral now to statecraft. It's integral now to the foreign affairs and diplomatic community, which I'm a part of. It's indicative in the Biden administration's approach to a new industrial policy, where we put $52 billion into revitalizing the microelectronics industry in the United States, tried to revitalize the clean energy agenda in the United States and the clean tech agenda as well. And of course, it's indicative in the recognition that we need to elevate the ways in which technology is transforming economic statecraft, military affairs, and how we need to rethink upstream and downstream dimensions of every technology stack. We now have India as a member of a partner in a critical minerals partnership at the upstream. We now have deep and integral conversations across many technology areas on supply chains. We've recognized the strategic impact of commercialization. And of course, now we're partnering with India on AI governance agendas around the world. So you see this full stack recognition of the intersection of geopolitics and technology. And in all of these technology areas where we care about, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's quantum information science, biotechnology, there's a recognition that we have a joint common project, which is to shape the rules of the road for these technologies as they play out. A recognition that the competition for commercial influence across the world to field, develop, deploy these technologies is not just a commercial competition, it's a geopolitical competition. A recognition that our common security and common prosperity require building trusted technology ecosystems in all of the critical technology areas. And of course, there's a recognition that in certain very small subsets of these technology areas that implicate our narrow national security interests, we need to think through what small yards and high fence approaches to technology protection will require. And the logic of this statecraft and the logic of this template for thinking about the intersection of technology and geopolitics has really played out in the most vivid way in the US-India relationship through ISET. The breadth, depth, and ambition of the bilateral partnership and the urgency of the elevation of technology and geopolitics. ISET, if I can spend a moment on it, is not just another bilateral dialogue. It's a blueprint for how strategic partners and large democracies can shape the future of technology and, by extension, the future of the world. And at its core, it really is about reminding the world and driving forward the belief that the 21st century should be rooted in shared democratic values. And so when President Biden and President Modi did launch this initiative in 2022, they had a larger vision, a larger agenda, and I've been privileged personally to be a part of the 2 National Security Advisor ISET programs, as well as the intercessional agenda that we had here on the margins of the GTS Summit last year. And what they've done more than anything else, if we look back on 18 months of accomplishment, is by bringing together the highest level officials in governments, what they've done is activate extraordinarily large and complex bureaucracies to act in unprecedented ways with unprecedented speed to accomplish concrete action. And they've done so only because of partnership often with the private sector in that. So let me just share a few examples of what this looks like to explain what a true full stack tech partnership looks like across R&D, hardware, manufacturing, supply chains, commercialization, applications, and rules and governance. At the hardware level, in semiconductors, the recent announcement during the Modi-Biden summit on the creation of a new semiconductor fabrication plant was a remarkable achievement, something that probably would have not been imaginable 18 months ago or 2 years ago, and was unlocked because of ISET, a commitment to focus on advanced sensing communication, power electronics for national security that can touch on next-gen communications and green energy applications, a partnership between a private sector firm, the US government, the US military, and the Indian government, the Indian military and India's semiconductor mission. So you see this incredibly complicated partnership coming together and producing outcomes. We're putting real resources and effort behind the R&D relationship, which is long-standing and we should be proud of over decades. $90 million in committed government funding over the next 5 years for the US-India Global Challenge Institute, the U.S. National Science Foundation and India's Department of Science and Technology, selecting 11 projects for funding with a grant of over $5 million covering key areas like telecommunications, connected vehicles, and machine learning. And in the realm of biotech, an area where we need to do far more than we've done in the past, a commitment to the first ever joint call for collaborative research projects in computational biology and other cutting-edge fields like biomanufacturing solutions. Last month, I was delighted to help host a coordination mechanism meeting between U.S. and Indian quantum officials in Washington, indicative of the next phase of a complicated evolution of a technology that's going to require U.S.-India cooperation. And tomorrow, I'm delighted to go up to New Delhi to help participate in the awarding of 17 awards for binational research in AI and quantum technologies through the U.S.-India Science and Technology Endowment Fund. Now, all of this seems like a long list, and lists are not interesting in remarks, but the list is what conveys the concrete actions that can come out of what many people believed was only going to be a symbolic diplomatic effort. It's these concrete applications across the broad swath of technology areas that demonstrate progress and action. And so in that respect, I think it's the cumulative mass of this effort that's so impressive and provides a model for the future, and that makes me extremely optimistic looking forward. So what would be next in a US-India technology partnership, and one I think that speaks to a much larger conversation in the world about how we bring technology for good, technology applications to the entire world, including the global south, which has, over the past 2 decades, rightly been very concerned about being left behind in a digital divide. I think here, India's role as a global shaper of technology now and in the future is extremely promising and exciting, whether through its role in leadership of the Global Partnership on AI over the past year, to its ambitious rollout domestically and now global vision for DPI. We see an opportunity for India to reach the developing world through its long-standing leadership in new ways, leading with technology across the stack. And I think the United States would very much like to be a partner in bringing that affirmative vision and those capabilities and capacities to the developing world. We certainly are playing our part. Just 2 weeks ago in New York, Secretary Blinken launched a global partnership on inclusivity on AI with the private sector, which is determined to deliver $100 million in AI capacity to the developing world in the categories of compute and context and capacity building. And so I think together we have a real opportunity to take what has been a bilateral relationship that's been successful and create a whole bunch of opportunities around the world. It is, and as another wise person told me yesterday, a place where innovation can meet inclusion in reaching the global south, and certainly we're eager to play our role cooperatively. This geometric expansion of the US-India tech partnership has played out in other ways as well. I was fortunate to be a part of the first trilateral technology conversation between the US, India, and the Republic of Korea, covering many of these areas. The US and India are participating in a Bio5 project to think about what resilience of supply chains and pharmaceuticals will look like, an example of supply chain diplomacy and efforts in a multilateral context as well. And so you start to see opportunities really not expanding linearly, but geometrically through this relationship. It's really been a privilege to be a part of seeing the growth of this evolution. It's been really exciting to see the ways in which the think tank ideas, which germinate over many hours in some of these workshops, are translated into policy ideas, and then looking back a year or 2 years later to see how those policy ideas actually become policy and then suddenly show up in presidential statements and then drive bureaucracies into action. And so you see the full life cycle of ideas turning into action through this ISET process, in part to a large extent thanks to work like this. And of course, the take-home message coming to a place like Bengaluru is that it's not governments that are going to drive this relationship forward. It's certainly not governments that are going to drive the technology forward. It's going to be the entrepreneurs, the private sectors, and the next generation of tech leaders working across borders, across Bengaluru and the Bay, that are going to drive this forward in partnership with wonderful organizations like Carnegie. And so, just as I am convinced that the AI assistant at the hotel is not peak Bengaluru when it comes to tech innovation, I'm quite sure that we also have not yet reached peak ISET in the US-India relationship. So I really look forward to the conversation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Center, for the keynote. May I please request Shankar Maruvara, CEO and co-founder of AkeStep, to come on stage and continue the conversation with Dr. Center on the present and future of tech partnerships.
Hello? Oh, wow, okay. I said thank you for that wonderful speech. Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technologies. You seem to be straddling a whole bunch of silos. Tell us, what does your day look like? What does a Special Envoy do? And why do you think US State Department created this position?
I think it was not to create more bureaucracy, I hope, is the short answer. I think what we realized, first and foremost, is that technology is going to be an inseparable part of statecraft going forward. that we already had, at least in our foreign ministry, and I think many other foreign ministries as well, some technical expertise, but they were only looking at it as an economic problem, as a narrow military problem, as a problem that would impact, technology is a problem that would impact democracy and human rights. And no one was looking across these issues. And because no one was looking across these issues, it turned out that oftentimes our senior diplomats who would be formulating policy might not have a technologist with them advising them on how to think through the implications of the technology revolution. And I think it was a safe bet as we thought through how to fix that problem, that these opportunities and challenges in technology were going to be with us for the foreseeable future. It's as if we were building a new kind of diplomacy, and we needed someone who could look across these issues, elevate them, make sure that our leadership had them. And then, of course, I think also our goal in creating this position is to help encourage our partners also to elevate technology in their own diplomacy and use the position that I'm in and the expertise we're bringing in the government as a model to help other governments do the same.
You're playing a crucial role at a crucial juncture in global politics. From the CHIPS Act to the IRA, US seems to be determined to create a new global supply chain, reshoring, friendshoring, and protecting technological innovations and markets. At the same time, China seems to be doubling down on domestic technologies. How do you view the current drivers of the geopolitics of technology?
I think first and foremost, we have to look clearly at the situation and acknowledge that the primary reason that foreign ministries, national security communities are talking about technology is not only because we are in the midst of these converging technological revolutions, but because we have to recognize that governments around the world see these as sources of power and leverage and influence. And that is an inextricable component of history at every phase in which there are technological disruptions and technological revolutions. Governments, nations seek to harness them. Our goal in elevating technology in our diplomacy, working with partners, is very simple. It's to ensure that we continue to create a stable rules-based order in which these technologies are used as forces for good, and to the extent possible, their disruptive impacts are minimized on our societies and the resilience and health of democracies. And that what that has required in reality is quite a complicated set of actions which work backwards from the proposition that we have found ourselves in a situation in which our resilience, at least at the manufacturing and supply chain level in many of these technology areas, was far less robust than we would have imagined, or at least the resilience and fragility of the supply chains is a national security problem in a way it would not have been 1 or 2 decades ago. And that's why the depth of that conversation, whether in the microelectronics, pharmaceuticals, has become so important to our alliance diplomacy with countries like India.
You're in Bengaluru, the home of technology and innovation, a city of techno-optimists. The audience in this room is representative of this tech-first ethos of the city. How much of your time goes in understanding technologies and innovation? And how do you apply this knowledge in diplomacy?
So first and foremost, I appreciate the techno-optimism. India, at least if you look at polls, is more than twice as optimistic Indians as Americans about the prospects and opportunity presented by AI, and so it is refreshing to travel to places like India to see the prospects and hope for these technology revolutions to play out. I think what's most important is we engage with technologists, and by technologists I mean really the serious innovators who are at the cutting edge and frontier of these technologies is they allow you to imagine futures that are different than the one we see today. What is hardest for all of us, I think, psychologically, is to imagine that the future will be different than the reality that we are living in right now. And that applies also to our technology diplomacy, where in 2023, when I started in this role, I assumed, this was just before ChatGPT became a powerful cultural influence around the world, that AI was going to be a far quieter part of diplomacy than our biotech diplomacy and our quantum diplomacy. And within months, it came to dominate the global, not just the global agenda, but the global technology diplomacy agenda. And I think, candidly, if I would have been talking more closely to some folks in the AI community, we would have been in a position to be much more anticipatory than we were. And so that's the kind of lesson that I think all of us need to take forward, is to make sure that we're constantly touching the innovators in whatever the technology it is, so that we can at the very least try to shape the future rather than be shaped by it.
Recently, the Quad Leaders Summit in Delaware that President Biden hosted, that summit produced a principles document on DPI. For many of us who started working on DPI more than 15 years ago, Pramod in the room, Alok, and several other friends, very much from a domestic perspective, the Quad statement seems extraordinary. You are sitting in front of an audience, many of whom have created or built upon DPIs. Could you give us a sense of how the US government or your office thinks of DPI?
So I do think that Quad statement on DPI is a landmark in the evolution of the US-India collaboration and cooperation and thinking about DPI. India's been remarkably successful in rolling out a series of technology innovations within India, and then it's been diplomatically quite influential in taking that concept of DPI, which of course is not exclusive to India, but which India is very much rolling out tech-based solutions to, into a multilateral framework at the G20, in the UN context and conversation at the Global Digital Compact. And I think as the United States thinks about the resonance and appeal of the DPI idea around the world, and why it's generated so much momentum, particularly in the global south, I think what we have to recognize is there's a huge demand for innovation. There's a huge demand to digitize government services. There's a huge demand to find frictionless, relatively low cost, modular, interoperable approaches to the digital revolution. And India has provided a model of success and a technological stack which has a great amount of appeal. And so I think the United States sees an opportunity to be a part of this. It sees an opportunity to partner with India in reaching particularly the developing world with innovative tech-first solutions. The Quad statement is important because it provides a framework and architecture for outlining the key criteria any DPI project would need to have: transparency, considerations of privacy, cyber-physical security, interoperability, modularity, that I think will help to shape and define what is responsible and productive approaches to DPI and what would be approaches to technology that would hinder or threaten rights, hinder or threaten privacy, create closed systems, all of which I think we oppose jointly in the world.
In the last 2 days, this group has discussed two powerful ideas, DPI and AI, and you've talked about both. But when you put them together, what kind of global opportunities are you seeing for an Indo-US partnership?
This is the intriguing nexus of AI applications with an underlying architecture, physical architecture, digital architecture, where if we can fuse low-cost, interoperable hardware with the incredible innovation unlocked and enabled by open source and closed source AI innovation, which will allow for innovators, big and small, in large and small countries, poor and rich countries, to iterate and create. I think the possibilities to harness AI to solve the kinds of societal challenges which we believe it can solve are really going to exponentially expand. This is where I think the optimism piece that comes out of India can really help to shape and inform the approach of many other countries to the digital future, and really take a narrative that had been quite pessimistic over the past 20 years about digital divides and transform it into a much more hopeful future.
Excellent. Earlier you told us about the ICET. How unique is this partnership and the new structure that has been created? And what message would you have for the tech builders and venture capitalists sitting in this room?
Well, I think I haven't hidden my views or the United States' views on the success and accomplishments of ICET. It is unique in the sense that a presidential-driven directive stewarded by national security advisors, creating the breadth and depth of technology agendas that can activate entire large government agencies across everyone from the niche quantum communities that we have to our more traditional R&D agencies, to our defense departments, to our foreign ministries, which otherwise maybe would have been in backwaters of these conversations, is incredible. We've tried to apply that same model in a few other cases to elevate technology dialogues, to unlock obstacles, to deepen partnerships. And then ultimately, I think the goal will be to try and stitch together these kinds of technology relationships into a broader lattice work.
The US has focused on reshoring the semiconductor industry. The CHIPS Act has attracted investments back inside of America. India, too, is in the early stages of building an Indian semicon ecosystem. What are the opportunities for India and US to work together?
The bottom line is that no country is going to be able to reshore an industry as complicated and multifaceted as the semiconductor industry. What each of us need to do is look at our comparative advantages, look at our minimum national security requirements, and then figure out what a trusted ecosystem would look like that is commercially viable, profitable, that creates comparative strengths. Obviously, already at the design, in the realm of design, India is one incredible contributor to the semiconductor industry. The investments that have been made in the aspirations of India's semiconductor mission rightly are thinking through how then that can translate into fabrication level projects, which I think is part of the larger and incredibly reasonable ambition to generate both commercial opportunity but also strategic resilience in India. I don't think that necessarily creates competitive pressures that are going to be detrimental to the relationship at all. In fact, just the opposite. In all likelihood, the kinds of investments that we are making, that India is making, that many of our partners are making in their domestic microelectronics industries, I think are going to create an overall ecosystem that is going to serve the kinds of industries that are going to rely on this industry much better in the future.
Building on the idea of trusted ecosystems, in the last year's AI Safety Summit at Bletchley, the idea of AI Safety Institutes came up, and it is already a reality in many countries of the world, including UK, US, France, and Singapore. And India, too, is talking about activating a center here. Can you give us a sense of this growing club of safety institutes, and what do you see as their future?
The backdrop for the AI Safety Institute conversation is the remarkable progress made in the international AI governance conversation over the past 18 months, in which we have moved quite rapidly towards a global consensus on what the architecture or framework for safe, secure, and trustworthy AI governance should look like. It's articulated in the landmark documents like the Bletchley Statement, the Seoul Statement. It's been enshrined in the UN General Assembly resolution, which India and the United States co-sponsored on AI. But what it does not do, this kind of international framework, is dive deeply into the technical criteria, technical benchmarks that one would need to actually discern whether AI systems are safe for deployment in societies, whatever that context may be. And in part, that's because the science of AI is so nascent and immature that in the absence of building up the underlying science, it's going to be very hard to make additional progress at the international governance level. And so what the United States has done, what the United Kingdom has done, what India is in the midst of doing is trying to build up a technical capacity to develop and benefit from that AI science, to translate it into benchmarks, guidelines, frameworks that can then translate into whether it's soft regulation or hard regulation in a national context, and most importantly, an interoperable framework in an international context that's going to enable the safe application and enjoyment and acceleration of AI innovation for all of the use cases that we believe it will have to benefit the world.
The US has a positive vision of emerging technologies, often referred to as tech for good. Other countries are sometimes concerned about the dystopian uses of such technologies. How has the US State Department used diplomacy to try and grow the consensus around technology for good with other nations?
As I said, we're not as optimistic as I think I would hope we would be on all of these technology areas. But the Tech for Good agenda is one, I think, that really grows out of a much longer standing US commitment to addressing the challenges and needs, particularly of the developing world, and a recognition that many of the goals that all of us set for ourselves in the world, the Sustainable Development Goals that we all committed to, are further off track than we would have hoped when we set that agenda. And while we're not techno-utopianists, I think we do believe that technology can be an accelerator to get back on track. And concretely, the United States has done a few things, for instance, in how we want to leverage AI for AI for good or tech for good agenda. As I mentioned just a couple of weeks ago, we brought together some of the leading AI firms and collectively committed $100 million towards AI for good. And that's not just in the realm of pushing AI applications to solve specific problems. It's a recognition that the real demand signal in much of the developing world is for capacity building, enablers, infrastructure. And so we want to focus on using this development assistance to provide compute credits, for instance, for small research organizations or governments that may need help, to help encourage and facilitate and catalyze additional training, skill training at all levels up to the graduate level to ensure that countries can become AI ready. And ensure also that as models are developed and built, that the kinds of data sets needed to ensure that they are less biased, more representative, culturally nuanced are taken into account. And so there's an abstract idea of tech for good or AI for good, and then there's the concrete actions that need to be taken, and we're quite determined, both in the State Department and our foreign assistance programs, to drive that forward.
Space is often called the final frontier. I'm sure there are a lot of Star Trek fans out here. But in the case of India, it was one of the early movers in this area, and this bet paid off in the form of a well-respected public sector space program. However, the private sector in India is in its stage of infancy. It's very early days. Can the Indian private sector cooperate with their US counterpart as equals? Is there scope for Indian companies to move the needle in the US space ecosystem, which often operates at an exponentially larger level?
I think first and foremost, the best reason for optimism is the government-to-government cooperation on space, which I think unlocks an entirely different conversation within their respective private sectors about how they can engage in space. Obviously, having joint research projects, working on satellite launch together are indicative of a trend that's going to create a new structural reality for our private sectors. I don't know that scale is necessarily the most consequential component of this. I would say, as we see the rapid change and acceleration in other sectors of cooperation, where we've knocked down barriers and obstacles to private sector work, for instance, in the defense sectors, it's indicative of a possibility that the future as we experience it today will not be the reality of tomorrow if there is political and bureaucratic will to move forward. Often, I think the private sector sees barriers and obstacles and gets discouraged from moving forward, from pushing harder in cooperation with governments. And I would hope one of the lessons that we've seen of ISET over the past year is that some of these seemingly insurmountable barriers to private sector cooperation with governments in the US-India relationship are not as insurmountable as people would have imagined.
Yeah, that's great to hear. As someone who's a historian, a social scientist, and a practitioner, and in the world of emerging technologies, where is diplomacy going to be needed the most? And what role can India play as you see it in this?
So first and foremost, we should avoid at all costs the kinds of analogies that would overhype or over-securitize the technology revolution that we're experiencing. I think about artificial intelligence and the ways in which automatically the public discussion and even the discussion among AI experts has moved towards the nuclear analogy, whether that's in the context of global regulation through an IAEA or in the context of governments needing to develop Manhattan projects for AI. I think these are deeply, deeply misleading. They're harmful to the adoption and acceleration and responsible governance of these technologies. And what I've been pleased by and really heartened by in conversations with India and my Indian counterparts and talking about an AI future and what responsible innovation looks like is this is one place where those kinds of analogies have not nearly been as pervasive as in talking to other countries and governments. And so I think a sober, practical approach to these technologies is one area that's problem-based, focused on solving societal challenges, is one area where I think we could learn quite a lot from the Indian approach to technology.
As someone whose job involves peeking into the future through the mists of time and a student of history, what book do you go back to?
I knew you were going to ask this question, so I had to think hard about this. One is actually an obscure book that I guarantee no one here has ever read, which is the official Department of Energy history of the U.S., the origin of the U.S. nuclear program. You can find it on PDF, but it's not very exciting read. And the reason I highlight this is because if you study the examination of the early period of nuclear history, the evolution of the industry, the evolution of government efforts, it looks nothing like what we are experiencing today in the AI revolution. At the hardware level, at the level of international governance, at the national security application layer, at the role of the private sector in supporting the government. And so it's the kind of historical story which is history at its best, which is ruthlessly honest, which is accurate, not sensational, and which allows us to think more accurately about the experience we're in by finding differences, not similarities to the past. One of the great failures that we all have in applying history is we tend to look for similarities, and then we seize on that similarity, and it's very hard cognitively to escape what we suddenly decide is this analogy. And sometimes it's most helpful to think what is different, not what is alike.
So the confirmation bias could mislead you if you're looking at the past.
We could just all be psychologists and understand it's confirmation bias and not read the history. We could do that as well.
Now, building on that, how do you define technology, innovation, ecosystems from your perspective? What do they mean to you, technology, innovation? Rudra said Bangalore has a thriving ecosystem. How do these connect up?
We have an interesting situation where I learned this from a commissioner on the AI Commission who is an esteemed and renowned AI scientist. And he said to us, look, guys, it's only AI until you've used it for 2 years, and then it's just software, right? So innovation in technology and novelty wears off extremely quickly when you're thinking about the emerging part of critical and emerging technologies. And so our goal is to rapidly transition from the novel phase to the deeply embedded phase where a technology is simply a part of embedded in our landscape, our lives, and do that in the least disruptive way for our societies, the least disruptive way for our national security policy, the least disruptive way for our economies. That's the goal of government, good government public policy as we think about our responsibility for stewarding technology from a critical and emerging phase into a take-for-granted phase of technology to get through one of these technology revolutions. We know they're always disruptive. We unfortunately know that often they lead to destabilizing consequences for a security environment. We know that they can be deeply destabilizing and revolution-producing at societal levels. And so if we recognize those things, then it sort of becomes clearer what our ambition as public policy officials are, whether at a state level, a national level, or an international level.
And I can't let you go without asking this. Any bets on the election?
I can say with confidence that there will be strategic continuity in how we approach geopolitical competition, the role of technology in statecraft, but as my boss, Secretary Blinken, says, we do policy, not politics.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Seth Center, who has done an enormous amount of work over the last 18 months to push forward the Indo-US partnership in multiple ways. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Seth, and thank you for everything.
Thank you, Dr. Center and Mr. Maruvara, for this engaging conversation. We now have a live virtual keynote address from Periasamy Kumaran, Special Secretary for Economic Relations and Development Partnership Administration, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India.
distinguished panelists and participants, colleagues from the Ministry of External Affairs, other ministries, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to speak to you on a topic that holds immense potential to reshape economies, societies, and governance worldwide. Although I'm unable to travel to Bangalore and join you, I'm glad that I'm able to share thoughts with you virtually. The annual Global Technology Summit, or GTS, as it has come to be known now, is among the few flagship Fact 1.5 foreign policy outreach initiatives that the Ministry of External Affairs, through the Policy Planning and Research Division, supports and collaborates for. The last edition, which was the 8th edition of GTS, was co-hosted by NEA and Carnegie India in December 2023 in Delhi with the theme Geopolitics of Technology. The next edition of GTS is expected to be held sometime next year. However, given the importance of rapid developments in technology, which has become a key input into policy making in government and the private sector, we thought it was essential to maintain the continuity of this innovation dialogue and workshops so that all stakeholders in the technology domain continue to remain engaged. I would therefore like to congratulate Carnegie India for putting together this dialogue. The themes of this dialogue are very relevant and topical, including those on DPIs, AI, and technology partnerships. I'm going to speak today mainly on DPI. Friends, over the past decade and a half, DPI has evolved from a conceptual framework to a tangible, practical force, catalyzing unprecedented innovation, driving improved public service delivery, and promoting greater economic inclusivity and development. Today, the DPI model has emerged as a key Indian value proposition and is being adopted and adapted by countries worldwide. It is now clear, based on our own experience during this period, that for DPI-based solutions to work optimally and to produce the kind of outcomes envisioned, we require three key aspects to come together: technology, governance, and community. Technology creates the digital systems, technical protocols, and applications that provide the building blocks. Governance is critical in facilitating user adoption at scale by establishing trust. Governance frameworks may include rules of engagement governing stakeholder behavior, cross-cutting and domain-specific norms, laws and policies, and governance embedded into digital technologies. Finally, vibrant and broad-based community participation is essential to enable value creation. This includes private sector and civil society actors who can collaborate to unleash innovation and unlock value. DPI can play a transformative role in a number of areas. These include financial inclusion, small business empowerment, as we have seen from ONDC, transparent delivery of citizen services, driving blockchain-based financial services, unified lending platforms. We've seen this in the case of ULI, which is currently being introduced, and central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, smart cities and urban development, telemedicine and health data systems, digital voting and real-time policy feedback, integrated lifelong learning platforms, energy efficiency and climate action, public safety and security, disaster response, smart agriculture, supporting the gig economy and micro-entrepreneurship, and supply chain transparency and food safety management systems. Many of these ideas are already under implementation, but more will come on stream in the months and years ahead. With the integration of AI to make better sense of the huge amounts of data generated, DPI can become the backbone of an interconnected, more efficient and inclusive digital society. I'm sure we will hear more on this from Dr. Pramod Varma, the next speaker. Friends, allow me to make a few points on the intersection of DPI with international cooperation and the global impact it can generate from the vantage point of the Minister of External Affairs. As new technologies emerge at a rapid rate, they risk benefiting a select few and perpetuating a digital divide of sorts. As India advances in its DPI journey, we are committed to assisting other nations in adopting and scaling digital public infrastructure. The potential for DPI to drive global progress is substantial if supported by the requisite level of international cooperation. India's successes provide a strong foundation for us to assist the Global South in developing and scaling its own DPI initiatives. The following are key ways India can play a role in supporting the Global South in DPI development: technology transfer and knowledge sharing, promoting the adoption of open source technologies. Number 2, advising and capacity building on data governance policies and cybersecurity cooperation. Number 3, advocacy for global standards in DPI. India can advocate for interoperable and open global digital standards in the relevant forums, ensuring that DPI developed in the Global South is compatible with global systems. This could help with cross-border collaboration, especially trade, finance, and health. Fourthly, digital innovation and startup engagement. We can encourage partnerships between India's own thriving digital startup ecosystem and entrepreneurs from the Global South to co-create DPI solutions. This could include accelerators, incubators, and collaborative funding mechanisms. I am glad to note that our partners among the developed countries and multilateral institutions are fast recognizing the importance of promoting DPIs. Building on the global understanding and efforts in DPI and its own experiences, India focused on DPI as one of the key priority areas during its G20 presidency in 2023. The G20 consensus on DPI, encapsulated in the Leaders' Declaration, represents the first such internationally agreed understanding on the concept, description, and applications of DPI. This includes a G20 framework on systems of DPI and the Global DPI repository. India also announced the creation of a Social Impact Fund for accelerating DPI implementation across the Global South and agreed to contribute an initial $25 million. In addition, the DPI approach has received endorsement at the SEO, Digital Ministers level, the Quad Leaders Meeting, and the India-EU Trade and Technology Council. This was also reflected in the Global Digital Compact adopted at the UN-hosted Summit of the Future last month. Multilateral financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank have also unequivocally endorsed the DPI approach. A number of countries have already signed MOUs with India for the deployment of India-style DPIs. Back in July 2021, Bhutan became the first country to adopt India's DPI. Since then, UPI has been steadily adopted, or operational linkages established elsewhere, including in Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Nepal, UAE, Morocco, and Singapore. We are extending under our ITEC program several capacity building opportunities to government officials from the Global South to help them develop a better understanding of the concept and relevance of DPI platforms and the regulatory Depending on the needs of the partner country, the DPI platform could be hosted on secure servers based in that country or hosted on cloud-based infrastructure. Friends, despite the immense promise of DPI, challenges remain. Ensuring privacy and data security, addressing the digital divide, and building trust in digital systems are critical. Additionally, there are governance challenges such as ensuring transparency, accountability, and inclusivity in the development and deployment of DPI. However, these challenges also present opportunities. India's experience with large-scale digital transformation offers useful lessons for overcoming these obstacles. By investing efforts in fostering cross-border cooperation, promoting digital literacy, and ensuring that DPI systems remain open and inclusive, we can unlock the full potential of DPI for global development. I look forward to hearing more about the outcomes of your deliberations and on ways to take them forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for the keynote address. Your address has set the context for the next keynote and panel. We're now delighted to have Pramod Varma, co-chair of the Center for Digital Public Infrastructure, deliver a keynote address on the past, present, and future of DPIs.
Thank you. Is this on? Hello? This is on? All right. Okay, thank you. Good evening. I think the speakers before me has set this up exceptionally well. Very, very well set up for the 20-minute or so. I have, okay, you're readjusting to 80 minutes. All right, 20 minutes I have. To speak about a little bit of past, current, and most importantly, where we are going with this. I think the idea of technology for societal development is not new, it's been there. And India has been, for the people who are not familiar, India is really largest, most populous nation on earth, 1.4 billion people, 22 official languages. There's no single language that binds us other than maybe English, but it's only for the top of the society. And this diversity necessitated India to look at slightly different way to create non-uniform but unified infrastructure for diverse solution and inclusion. While inclusion was the primary agenda, inclusion of large section of the society was the primary agenda, we also balanced innovation. I think that was a interesting learning that we got in. And the first 10 years or so, 15 years, we primarily focused on three things. And they started with our identity project. I don't know what's wrong. Okay. Okay. What did that primarily drive is the formalization, the initial formalization of the society. So the identity starts to become the starting point of people to be recognized in the system. So a system to recognize their people, identity plays an important role. Registries plays an important role, attestations plays important role. So we started doing that, and it's not only India. If you look at Morocco, we have here folks from there who led that project, or Philippines, very large number of people who have been starting to bring into digital identity to work. So digital identity actually grew from nobody having an identity to 1 billion people having identity in about 6 years, 6.5 years in India, right? So this was a massive formalization. But that's not the purpose of identity, was not to give identity. Purpose of identity was to provide products, services on top of identity. And that's where we moved into this next layer of transformation primarily with respect to financial inclusion. And that drove from bank account opening, access to accounts, and most importantly, access to payments. Both P2P, P2M payments, but even more importantly, G2P payments. India continues to be a large part of Indian budget continues to go towards the subsidies. And it's grown over years, quite large amount of subsidy. And the ability for the government to give subsidy on time to the right people has been a huge obstacle in India. And one of the things that we did as part of the G2P infrastructure is to create world's largest G2P rails. And now that set of infrastructure that is used beyond G2P, by the way, but it is one of the government continues to be one of the largest use case. We transferred about $450 billion US over the last decade to more than, nearly a billion people, 960 million people. So it's very, very, very large program that is driving, plus the UPI here, PromptPay in Thailand, or Pix in Brazil. We have Brazilian friends here. Massive P2P, P2M payment infrastructure beyond the cards. So in addition to cards being expanded, we also expanded the QR code and other based payments, mobile-based payments, right? But what it did trigger is the idea that, and this is a very, very interesting learning from India, that Indians were fast becoming data rich while they are still not economically rich. So they participate, 500 million people participating in digital transaction, digital payments, UPI today, 500 million people participate. Whether you're receiving money, sending money, you are creating digital trail. And the digital trail, if unleveraged, remains locked in to systems. So one of the big shifts that India made in 2016 with Nandan Nilekani's seminal talk on data democracy is about shifting that mental model that maybe we must relook at the idea of personal data, digital footprints, as an economic asset for people to grow their own progress, make their own progress. Whether it's individuals or SMEs, having the ability to harness their footprints to be able to drive access to products, access to capital, access to services and so on, access to opportunities in general. And that drove lots of discussions around credentialing, data, open data infrastructure. Not open data doesn't mean public, I meant access to my personal data. And if you look at UK and France and so on, open finance, open banking, these are not new constructs. But India has been actively investing in such infrastructure in India as well, as part of this journey, because this was one way to bring formalization further so that they can get access to opportunities, capital, products, and services. But what we are realizing, though, this is a past, this is what we are doing today so far, is that all these stepping stones were great, but not enough. So we had to reimagine the next possibilities because, again, people are movement of people, movement of goods, and movement of money is actually not restricted to geographies. And that continues to happen, whether you constrain a little bit because of geopolitics, eventually it finds its way to be able to manage, because that's how the world is continuing to grow. And it might be, whether it's in East Africa region, West Africa region, whether it's India or India, South Asia region, it doesn't really matter. This movement of goods and movement of data and movement of money has to be unthrottled. And unthrottling has to happen by putting individuals and businesses at the center of a design. And these three elements were the essence of much of what we do when we think about DPIs. One, ensure every digital transaction allows individuals, businesses, things to identify themselves. Their ability to prove who they are is an integral part of initiating a contract, a transaction or interaction. So identity is who am I plays a very key role. It's not about individual identity alone. It's a business identity, identity of things, identity of anything that is transacting in the system. And then subsequently, we also focused a little bit. We talked about data as asset, but we are still not there to convert real world and digital assets to be transactable, trustable, and transactable. Today's assets are very much in paper world. That means if I have a battery bank or a agriculture crop, they remain very, very, very low transacting nature because of the inability to trust, inability to verify, inability to transact, inability to lend against, and so on. And if every bank has to do that repeatedly, the cost of doing that is very high. So it is important for us to convert assets into a verifiable, transactable, low-cost asset. This is a very fundamental shift in large, cross-border, low-cost, high-volume trade scenarios. So that's an area that we have to focus. But these two are only enablers for something what everybody wants to do. Convert my asset and identities and data and money and everything else into be able to trade or transact or interact. That's why I think a lot of us are actually starting to look at what does it mean to reimagine DPI globally as well. And that's where I think much of the discussion today was very, very relevant for us to be able to create global standards, global technology interoperability, and global. And now you can, on top of that, you can actually program geopolitical constraints. Now, there might be regulatory or other constraints that allow a bank or an individual not to transact with a particular country. That's okay. We are not being opinionated. We are saying that those rules can be programmed on top of a global infrastructure. That infrastructure, the idea of DPI, again, goes back to the 3 layers. A globally interoperable underpinning driven by safe, scalable, affordable, open technology. On top of that, all highways need rules of the game. You can't lay the infrastructure without rules. So you have to be able to program those rules, KYC rules, counterparty checks rules, PML rules, and so on that you want to be able to program on top of that. Of course, you need to be able to do that. And then allow entrepreneurs to drive innovation on top of it, because that's where the real unlock of value will happen to the society, not in the bottom 2 layers. They're just enablers. Much inspired by internet, no different. So when you look at the idea of standards, protocols, interoperability, decentralized nature of it, allows the same idea, architectural inspiration of the earlier efforts that we have seen that work at humanity scale. So we have to continue to push that agenda towards digital identities, digital assets, and digital transactions that we must be able to enable. But one underscored or less talked about, and yesterday we had a fantastic session in the afternoon, is the idea that DPI is not about government. DPI is not about centralized government-funded project. We are not talking GovTech. We are not talking e-governance. We are talking the idea of building extremely minimal infrastructure that allows market to innovate. So the story of DPI has been about private innovation. Entrepreneurs finding no different from internet. When you create that impetus, when you create that playground, entrepreneurs rise up to recompose, recalibrate, create new applications that otherwise we could not have imagined before. Why? To cater to the large population in the long tail that allows them to actually start participating. And that brings the 3 core pillars of DPI thinking. Policy alone won't cut it. Policy combined with globally interoperable infrastructure. By the way, when I say infrastructure, it can be just a set of specifications. Nothing more, not even software. You guys can build software. Idea is to create global interoperability and trust layers at the bottom. But these two won't balance itself. You need a real ingredient. Into that is the innovation for market. So combining these three ingredients in a smart fashion so that one is not overdoing the other. Too much policy with no infrastructure will remain legal. Too much infrastructure means you are actually eating into market innovation possibilities. But if you leave everything to market, you have an alternate problem, competition problem, monopoly problem, and other issues that you will have to eventually deal with. So how do you balance is no perfect answer. It's something that you need to constantly calibrate. But that's the essence of DPI. Essence of DPI is to calibrate that and then push for the next generation. Now I'll speak about three things that we want to cover globally. And that's where the global partnerships, global efforts, global standard or specification discussions must go towards that, is to allow going in one country at a time to go beyond countries, to go cross-border, to actually unlock that possibilities. And one of them we are very focused on is converting data as an economic asset. I talked about it. Today, much of the cross-border, customs, paperwork, or identity itself, when you travel, a student traveling from here to Europe or US eventually carries paper. We are back to using paper because there's no other way. We are able to carry verifiable data trails, verifiable credentials that I have to the next country. So we are going back to very silly mechanisms of paper with original paper, paper with seal, signature, wet signature, which is just not scalable because you can fake everything. So I think if you want a high trust, low cost, user control mechanism, you need to go back to asking basic questions. How do we convert data, affiliations, achievements, credentials, transaction trails into cryptographically protected, non-tamperable proofs that individuals and SMEs can carry so that when I contract with a counterparty, whether it is across the border or domestic, both can trust each other and transact at a low cost, high volume. We are working on a paper, so if you are interested in contributing, you will be attributed fully. You can actually join. This is an open source effort, just putting our thoughts together. You can scan if you want to, and then actually contribute to that paper. This paper actually reimagine what is data as an economic asset and how does data flow work, personal data flow. I'm not talking about bulk data and so on. My own things, the fact that I worked in a company. As a driver, the fact that I worked in a company like Uber. The fact that I have a reputation score of 4.9. How do I harness this and make sure that is portable and verifiable? Very simple, powerful imagination that you can participate in contributing. Then we are actually asking the question that alone is not enough. We also need to push beyond credentialing into tracking of provenance tracking of some of this when it comes to scope 3, when it comes to climate financing, when it comes to lending, global lending. If you want global lending paths to open up, you need to be able to actually tokenize them. Not only credentialize them, you need to be able to tokenize them. I'm not talking particular technology. I'm talking about idea of tokenizing beyond credentializing to be able to lock, transact, trust, and actually go cross-border. There is a very powerful paper. This is not an Indian effort at all, by the way. Some Indians are participating, but other than that, it's not an India government effort or anything. It's a truly global effort that actually started from between Basel. We launched in Washington, and we are actually doing this because this is an imagination of a bunch of both regulators, financial regulators, and technologies coming together to create a much more universal infrastructure that allows assets, including money and data, to be able to actually move much more freely in the control of the user. So very, very interesting possibilities emerge. You can scan that. There is a global sandbox that is coming up. Okay, I need to get extra minute just because this damn thing doesn't work. Okay, so we are actually doing there's a global sandbox that has come together, very large financial institutions around the world and other regulators are participating. If anybody wants to go check out this, completely an open source effort to design specifications, protocols, specifications, and an architecture, not software. Software will be written by private marketplace. So this is not an effort to write the software per se. This is to write the architecture and the specifications and the protocol, interoperable protocols that allow the market to create the next generation, and cheekily called Finternet, as big as internet, financial internet, right? So go for that. Go check it out. And I mean, I want to bring back this picture because both we talked about data and tokenization. We are still dealing with these two, identity and assets. We still have a big question in our mind in terms of transactions. And that's because, especially countries like India, man, this is tough. Okay. This formalizing the economy has been a very hard problem for us. That's because we are in this mode. I did not put India there because India is exactly the same thing. All digital transaction systems are under 10% penetration, including B2C commerce, one of the largest investment that has gone into the country, less than 10%. 90+% of 1.4 billion people are still transacting informally. Informal economy creates very low performing, high asymmetry, high cost, inefficient microeconomies, very local economies driving. It will never give the boost for any country like India, and this we see across the globe, across global south. Now fundamentally there's an issue because of the extreme context variance. This is what we are seeing, inability for us to unify through a single platform. That's because single platforms don't. If the single platform, one commerce platform, actually does 90% of our B2C, we might have a monopoly issue. But it's never happening because of the extreme diversity and scale we have. So one of the things that we have been asking ourselves, what did internet teach us? Internet taught us that internet is a network of platforms. It's not one platform. Internet is not one platform. It's a network of platforms. Could we reimagine what originally, Sir Tim Berners-Lee wrote, the semantic web and a transaction web beyond the content web that we experienced in the last 20 years. It is absolutely a possibility. This is a World Economic Forum paper analyzing what we call an open transaction networks. If you want to read, you can read it. There is significant effort. And I'll then close it out on the AI because we have further discussion coming up with another panel, is that why AI, as Seth was talking about, is a supercharging of DPI. We don't see AI and DPI as a DPI plus AI. It's a DPI to the power of AI because we cannot get the next billion people into the transacting economy unless we close the access barrier. Access to knowledge and information and access to interactions with the computing. We are investing, some of you are investing in the voice and other technologies precisely to get the next billion people to be able to go beyond entertainment world to transacting world. This is very, very key for us, and that's why we are investing in many of the efforts that you see in India as well. And we'll see this across the world. Now, in conclusion, very simple. If we repeat what India repeated in the last 15 years, one use case, one system, and one country at a time, we'll all be dead and gone, 100+ years, and yesterday somebody argued that this will never happen. Now forget 100+ years, you're optimistic. It will not happen. So maybe repeating what we did is not what we want to do. We want to be able to think even bigger. That's where our global coalition is going to come into picture. Because one country, one system, one use case is not how we want to put it. We want to be able to think like internet. We want to think, how does universal infrastructure with the user at the center starts playing out so that countries can program their rules rather than invest in bottom-up everything. People just onboarded them into internet. Can we do that? It's a very important question. And this is why I think we believe India, especially India, I can speak for India for sure, or maybe 7 billion people, 250 million businesses around the world, needs technology, uninhibited access to technology. May not be cutting edge, but definitely uninhibited access to technology. And I think technology needs India. There's no other way we're going to see any value out of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pramod, for your insights on DPI. Our first panel, titled Global Perspectives on Digital Transformation, aims to explore the key distinction between broad digitization and DPIs, address the global challenges faced by DPI projects, and identify the factors that contribute to or hinder their long-term success worldwide. The panelists are Hilda Makatambula, Digital Transformation Advisor to the East African Community; Russell Waruba, Deputy Secretary for Digital Government, Government of Papua New Guinea; Noruddin Butaya, President, Moroccan Foundation for the Promotion of Preschool Education; Kamal Paudel, Under Secretary, E-Governance Commission of Nepal; Ramesh Ragineni, Executive VP, Software Engineering, Salesforce. Request the panelists to please come on stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us from what's been a long day, but hope to have a really good discussion today. I've been requested to just kick off with a few kind of opening remarks or thoughts before we dive into this incredible panel and truly global representation across at least 4 continents that we have here. I think the main kind of thinking that you might have, or the misconception, I guess, you might have at this point is that DPI is somehow an India-led journey around the world, and it's an India-only story. And we're here to debunk that myth firmly. I think the power of this is that it's truly been adopted around the world, and the reason that it has is because, as Pramod and others have been framing, it provides GDP-level impact, but that can be palpable at a human level, right? And what we mean by that is when you look at the numbers or the scale or the speed of the transformation, you're quite excited by that. But the reality is that, a woman local to her village, even with this fancy technology backend system, may not know the details of the technology backend system. All she knows is that, she can use a feature phone to give an instruction and do a voice-based transaction in her language, maybe, or to send money very easily. Or someone, who's going to school or getting a medical record gets it with a small little box that they don't fully, haven't really registered immediately, but it's just black and white dots. And that powerful QR code, which is a printed small 2x4-inch on the piece of paper, on a human level, just completely changes the nature of the paper that she's carrying, right? And so I think what we're seeing is that ability to do that transformation is something we've seen around the world, and there's lots of different models for the way in which this has been adopted. So if you look at ID, for example, you might have in some countries, like in India or in Thailand, the main identity authority runs its own identity authentication. In a country like Bangladesh, you have a private entity called Parichoy that's built electronic KYC. In a country like Chile, you have an institution like Clave Unica, which has built an eKYC module that's completely separate from the civil registration department, but has connected with them and made that API openly available, right? In payments, you see so much diversity. In EAC, which we'll get to in a moment, you see the prevalence of telcos as players in this space. In others, in India or in India, you see a lot of fintechs on the front end. In Brazil, you see neobanks leading the charge, actually. So the diversity, I think, that we've seen really shows that while we talk about DPI like it's one big umbrella, there's actually a lot of ways in which this has been tailored and customized at a country level to drive this impact. And I want to get straight into the panel to sort of understand from the countries that we have represented, in order: Morocco, India, Tanzania/EAC, can I call you? East African Community, Nepal, as well as Papua New Guinea, to get a sense of their stories. So maybe I can start with, we can start with Kamal maybe. Kamal, do you want to tell us a little bit about, maybe one of the big success stories that you're most proud of in, let's say, digitization as a space, and what are the lessons that you've seen from that? It doesn't have to yet be a DPI, but what are the real takeaways for people here that are looking to think on how they can deliver this in their country, in their context, and of that success story?
Thank you, Kamma, for your wonderful questions. I think, in my opinion, the political commitment is most important thing in order to drive any digital or whatever transformation you wish to implement in your country. That's why in my country, Nepal, I think the first important initiation is actually, I think it would be in 2008. And after 10 years, I think it had happened, because we established the separate department for national ID and vital registration. And this is responsible agency. We actually designate the responsibility to this organization and clear role and responsibility. That's why, and then it could functional now. And I think more than 15 million people have already enrolled in the national ID system. And I think this is a great milestone for us for further innovative adaptation of this kind of DPI. Because we know that in DPI there are 4 layers. In my country, only we have so far 2 layers. One is identification that is, I think, mitigated by the national ID, but still it is not universal coverage. And the other is the payment layer we have. But data exchange layer and the consent layer is not there. That's why still we are working on these 2 layers. I hope within a couple of years we'll be able to establish these fundamental principles in order to operate this DPI framework. Thank you.
Lovely. And Hilda, maybe you can tell us a bit from the East African community as a region, across the 8 countries, of course. What are the major success stories that you're proud of as a region, and what are the lessons to take away from that for any large-scale transformation?
Thank you very much, Kamia. I think, we all know mobile money is one of the good success stories from East Africa, and it started like a Kenya case, but currently it's a regional case in East Africa. Around 2021, we heard mobile money registered account 1,106 registered accounts per 1,000 adult population.
Wow.
So that is above, compared to Africa, it's 600, but also compared to Asia, which at that time it stood at around 500, and Latin at around 240. So I think we are ahead, and looking why are we successful in that area? It's just the way we think. Like this was across the globe. It was all about cards, MasterCard, and banks, traditional banks. But the good thing in East Africa was to be able to bring in the telcos. At the beginning, like a few years ago, nobody would think telcos can be helpful to financial inclusion. But being able to bring in the telcos have made a huge difference. Now financial inclusion, like for Africa, for Tanzania or Rwanda or East African region, banks like mortar and brick banks, it could have been very hard to go to rural areas because for private sector, there is no business case. And in our population, 65% is still in rural areas. But we had a very good success on mobile penetration. So that was a very good I think, way of thinking, trying to understand the problem and try to solve it, not just lift and shift, trying to understand the context in a region and come up with a solution that will work, or customizable solution to our region. I think that was part of the success.
Fantastic. So actually bringing in a new type of actor was really one of the big takeaways, which is very powerful as a lesson. Monsieur Boutayeb, do you want to tell us a little bit about what Morocco is very proud of in its transformation and how it got there?
Thank you, Kamia. I think no doubt that the success or the experience we are proud of it is our couple national population register, unified social register. And the idea began, or we began working on that since 2013, because we have this problem of universal subsidies that are not fair, that goes to rich people more than poor people. And so we were looking for something, and the key was to have an ID which could be could identify people, but also authenticate them. So it could be the key to go there. And so by trying to think about that, we heard about the Indian experience in 2016, Aadhaar. So we first invite the first director of UDAI, Mr. Aras Sharma, to come to Morocco, and we give it a lot of questions, like, and we were really surprised. He has answer to all our questions. So we came here. First, I sent my CTO, and after at that time I was a minister in the Home Affairs Department. So I sent my CTO, and after that I preside the delegation. We came here, and we go around the country, Delhi, Bangalore, Vijayawada, Mumbai, to see how it is used, because it's important. You say that we have to what are the key of success? The key of success first is to listen, and to understand. After that, to go and see, experience, to see how you distribute rice, for example, this 5 kilo per person per family with GPRS, not even 4G. So you have the capacity to adapt to technology. So after that, we noticed that even India, you seek for technical assistance for PwC and EY. So I returned to Morocco, and I asked for joining PwC and EY, Morocco and India. And we had PwC accompanying us, and so we did the job. When I was in Bengaluru, I met Mr. Pramod and even Mr. Nandan Nikani, and he made me a proposal. We had 30 minutes, and he made a proposal to write a digital public goods. That came massive after that. So I said, okay, I'll be on this. I'll accept this proposal. It has to meet my timeline. It has to be. I have to own the code source after that, the source code. And the third, if you are able to maintain during 3 to 5 years, because it will be written, and so I don't know if it will work. And we signed the MOU 2018. And now our system is working. We have about 21 million people enrolled in the national population register. And on top, it's not like here you have directly users that are government department users. We have what we call unified social register, where our families with a scoring that help other departments to see how to. So this system is working now, and it's quite okay. We did the pilot. I think it's necessary to do a pilot. We did the pilot in 2 cities, and it was to monitor our system. Is it good? And how? What is the time needed to enroll one person? Because that will size your experience. Overall. So now it's okay. It's just the first layer of our DPI.
Lovely. No, and it sounds like the lessons go beyond make sure you have a pilot to actually, what I'm hearing you say is try something new, try something that maybe hasn't been done before, because you were the first country in the world that actually did that. So
they came to me last year and they said, when you say Mozip, we say Butayab. Why? And they say, because you are a risk taker. I say, what? I take a risk, but it was calculated risk.
Calculated risks, yeah. I love that. Oh, there we go. Lovely. Let's come to you, Russell. Do you want to tell us about maybe some of the success stories that Papua New Guinea has seen? What are the lessons for others here?
Sure. Thank you very much. I bring you all greetings from our beloved country of Papua New Guinea. We are right in the Pacific Ocean, just north of Australia and attached to Indonesia. We have a population of around 12 million, very rugged. We are the most linguistically diverse country in the world, 800 languages,
Wow.
and 1,000 tribes. So just imagine what that means politically for our leaders. And we have 5 years to put everything in place and to deliver something by the end of 2027. So hence, we established the department, the ministry, and we put in all the legislative framework and the policies, and we created our own GovStack, our own government technology stack that aligns everything we do and how we interface with business. And without knowing, we actually had a layer which was called building blocks. And then, we reached out to ITU and we found out that they're actually DPIs or DPGs. So payments and ID. And in just 10 weeks, we developed our own digital ID, and we launched it last Thursday with a wallet and with a portal with 7 citizen-facing services: pay your water bill, pay your children's school fee, and utilities as well. So police clearance. So it's just basically adoption for us. And we went to Bhutan and we just white labeled the ID, and like for us, we needed to have quick sprint cycles to get things out on the market. And over the last few days, we have up to 2,000 subscription. We're putting an operational model around it. And it just goes to show that you can achieve a lot very quickly if you know exactly what you want and have the right partners to do it. So we are very, very fortunate. I was just speaking about my secretary, and he just told me that learn as much as you can. The thing that we need is to have assurance. You must have assurance. If you are deploying a cloud technology platform, infrastructure as code, you must have assurance for that work. If you're going to do DPI work, you must have assurance. Let your agencies at the sector and at the cross sector, do their business process mapping, attach it to the DPIs, and then deploy. So that has been our journey thus far.
And actually, you should tell the audience how long it took, because it's quite impressive how short the time.
Yeah, 10 weeks.
10 weeks, guys.
10 weeks. And,
probably took longer to set up the summit, huh?
When we were launching, we invited the Prime Minister. He didn't come. I was so happy he didn't come, because I was praying. I was sitting in the, I was praying, and I said, oh, good Lord, please let this thing be launched. And, and then take it down after it's launched. Yeah, but
everyone's going to check on their phone
we're
now, whether it's live
stabilizing
or
it now.
not.
We're stabilizing it now. So we have version 2.1, which we will launch to be eKYC compliant by November. And then by December, we'll also have an extra build out as well.
It's fantastic, fantastic effort to see. Ramesh, coming to you, maybe, do you want to tell us a little bit about the success stories that Salesforce, as a company, has built on in DPI in India?
Where do I start when we hear so much of fascinating stories here? But Salesforce is in the journey for the last many, many years in terms of how enterprise customers needs to use our digital platform. Not just a digital platform, also digital experience. And just the context of India, we started our journey a couple of years ago building lending platform. And obviously, India being a billion-plus population, and it's going to be a third largest economy by 2027. It's a huge potential opportunity how the digital modernization is happening, and we are in the journey. And in this journey, obviously, while we're building for global customers across the globe, just for India, we have to integrate with the internal services within India. So that's where the DPI comes in handy. And it's a scroll, walk, and run approach we have taken. 6 months, even last year, the type of integration we started doing for external services to make our lending platform successful, DPI is playing a very important. Again, we started with Aadhaar, we've integrated many low-hanging KYC integrations, whether it's UPI payment integrations, or even there's many integrations are in the roadmap right now. But just the way this micro to macro lending opportunity in the market in India, with the volumes we are working with the top banks as a design partners is incredible. And I'm amazed by how the 10 weeks you've implemented. I really want to talk offline and get some playbook from you. But it's a good story. It's great to hear such a complex DPI infrastructure can be implemented in such a short period is a good playbook.
Yeah.
But just coming back to Salesforce, I think we are in the journey, and we see while we are building for global, integration with the local country within India is very super important. And where we were with the DPI integration last year versus now is completely changing in the momentum, and we'll continue to go in the flow of evangelizing, exploring the DPI as we go in the long-term journey.
Fantastic. Again, on the panel, you see this interplay between the government and the market, and we keep drawing that out, but I think that's the real core of the difference between this approach. But maybe we can come back to you, Hilda, and you can tell us a little bit about, EAC is not just, it's a community of nations. It's not just one country bound by one set of laws. So when you're thinking about this, at a regional level, and therefore by extension, at a global level, because people in this room might be thinking about how does this affect 50 countries, in one go. What are the sort of design lessons that you have seen that actually work effectively to get a group of nations to all equally serve their citizens in different contexts? What have you seen work?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the important thing, for instance, at the regional global level is thinking at the regional, thinking about standard and protocols, but let countries be autonomy. So for instance, when it comes to the designing of DPI building blocks, let country do that. Like the design of digital IDs, data exchange systems, is it payment, for instance, switches at the national level? Let countries work on that, but as a regional, as a global, it's very important to develop standards and protocol. This is very important to ensure interoperability, and I think it's very important for a region or global to go fast, because once you have all those standards and protocol which are agreed by everyone. So that is where the tricky is. For instance, at the EAC, we have 8 countries. I think it's very important for all 8 countries to agree. This is the standards that we will work on or develop our digital ID, and these are our protocols, and this is what we are willing to share among us. And then from there, when countries are starting developing their own systems, they will have that, they can have the autonomy to develop the way they want, but following the standard and the agreeable protocol. I think this is very important to
But isn't it, I'm going to press on that a little, isn't it hard to get 8 countries to agree on a standard? Like, how did you actually successfully execute that at a level? Like, what are the tricks that you can share with the group here on how do you get that consent? Do you just start with 2 and then you wait for 3 or 4 to come on, or you kind of wait for everyone to agree before even the first country moves?
Okay, so the agreement will be done by everyone in the room. So, for instance, now we have 8 countries. Previously, we had 6. So we have 8 countries. We'll need all 8 countries, like experts. So start from the technical level first. What can we work together on this? For instance, currently we are embarking on data governance framework. So we started to discuss with this DPO, head of DPOs, like, okay, we need to share data. We have countries currently with their own policies, a few, but some do not have policies yet. But we want to work together at the regional level. If everyone will be having restriction on cross-border data flow, we cannot work together at the regional level. So we start that discussion at the technical level, then we'll go to the political. So once we agree at the technical level, then we can go for the political level, and then once that's approved, that means all countries, like all 8 countries, countries will have.
I guess it's easier to get the engineers to agree first, and
Exactly.
then you take it to the,
to the
politicians.
Yeah. So once it's work at the technical level, it's easy for them to convince political.
And they've already made progress.
Exactly.
And so you're starting from somewhere.
Yeah, but I think also one important thing, when you're working with multiple countries, you should also know these countries will be at different level of digital development. So maturity, yes. So you'll need to support others. While other countries could just move, but other countries will need more support. So you should be able to support them, at least to be able to reach to that standard and protocol so that you can work together.
So then a lightweight standard is very
Exactly.
powerful for that diversity.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So Kamal, maybe coming back to you, if we want to draw the conversation, closer to the potential of DPI. Of course, Nepal has implemented a lot so far already. I know you're working on a blueprint. Tell us a bit about the ambition that's unlocked, or the possibilities that you see in taking a DPI approach versus sort of a conventional digitization model.
Thank you, Kamba. I think for implementation of DPI, we have actually faced the legal and consent layer. That's why we are actually drafting the personal data protection law. Okay, this is a draft version. I think India has just recently passed, and then we can get some insight from that law also. I think this is one of my great milestones from this in innovation dialogue, and then I can communicate easily to my colleague. And next is, I think we face the capacity constraint, because I think if we actually implement one system and the local, the staff is unable to actually operate it, customize it, because the interoperability and localization are two factors that should be contained on our process. These two factors are necessary to implement the DPI, okay, to strengthen the DPI in the future. Because today what we have, maybe in the future we may have next, problem. And in order to address this problem, we may need additional information from the government. And there is one problem in understanding of the data and the consent. Basically, government is actually collecting the data from the public, citizens. And citizens are going to the government office to verify it themselves. Who am I? That's why the government is actually facing a lot of problem in order to verifying, the citizens. Because they already have the citizens' information, but they are actually investing a lot of human capital, financial resources to verify them. That's why, and in order to address this problem, I think the government and other institutions are actually agreed that we need to run data in order to avoid people run. First run the data across the government entities, institutions. Then automatically people have to stay in their home. And then they can get the public service delivery.
Lovely.
You can easily solve the people. Then I think it will be the good and effective implementation of the DPI's outcome in the future that they realize now. That's why every stakeholder, private sector, government institutions, political leaders, administrative bureaucrats, they all are now agreed on this commitment that we need to invest on the DPI.
That's fantastic. And I think, considering Nepal's rural and hard-to-reach areas, geographic diversity, getting to those areas would be almost impossible without sort of that DPI approach as well, right, in a way. Super. Right. So, Monsieur Boutin, coming back to you, maybe, there's this French saying, plus ça change, c'est plus la même chose. It's more that changes, the more the things are the same. So is DPI just old wine in a new bottle, or how do you see it as different from the conventional approaches to digitization? Now, having implemented it, what are the real differences that you've seen on the ground?
The real difference we see, we have this first layer. But we tried, for example, to build a citizen portal to have all our administrative procedure on it. But very rapidly, we confront a problem because we have the ID, but we haven't the payment tool, the payment layer. and we haven't also how to give this document to our citizens. So we need this DigiLocker or this QR code. So we did that, but it was vertical. It was not so. So when I heard about what's coming here, last May, I came again here. And I met with you, with a lot of people. And I think that if Morocco has to go on this journey, he had to resolve this problem of payment layer, because we have a large amount of cash circulating. So, and this QR code, as I said yesterday, could be the key to launch this thing. So I'm not now in a position of minister to impose something like I did before, but I'm a pro bono president of a preschool foundation. And so I said, perhaps I will do evangelization to go through that by setting a pilot on e-learning platform inspired by Diksha platform here. So now I signed another MOU with Triple IT Bangalore, and we are working with COS to implement this e-learning platform for my 25,000 educators all around Morocco. But the idea, the aim, is to convince the Ministry of Education to do that for its 300,000 teachers.
Wow.
So that could be the example. The second is to convince the IT department that the rails that Mr. Pramod said just before, these rails, if they are done, will let the private sector, startup, and all to innovate and to work on it. That's the aim of the, not next 10 weeks, but perhaps
no pressure.
Next
Russell,
one year, perhaps, or 2 years.
What have you done, Russell? Lovely. No, but coming to you, Russell, I think maybe if you can tell us what the ambition, what has been unlocked for you, and what you've learned on the differences between, a DPI approach to traditional digitization. I think that'd be helpful to get a sense from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've traditionally thought of it as an enterprise architecture and how you drive efficiency within government, which is traditionally, as a policymaker, that's what you think of.
Yeah.
But then, discussions coming out of this, and sir, you've mentioned rightly so that this is market innovation, where you allow the private sector to come in, just like the road, where, the government, the private, and the citizen uses it. So for us, having a good selection on partners, like having a good system integrator, we found that makes a key difference in how you deploy. Much of the success or the acceleration has been because of the groundwork that we've done over the years. So it wasn't overnight. And I forgot to mention our colleagues from our National Department of Education working with Sunbird now for the education LMS work. So my contract ends at the end of the year, and while here, my secretary, my boss, sent me my target. So I'll just share with all of you. By 2027, we have to have 85 to 90% 4G coverage, 30% 5G connected, 8 million people on digital ID, 5 million with bank accounts, 150 digital services, and we must deploy e-voting in 2027. That's when our next general election is. And because it's an economic indicator, we need to increase our non-tax revenue by 30 to 50%.
Yeah.
And this can only happen with DPI. This can only happen with DPI. Wow. And then we need to increase our GST by 20%. So it's this analogy of you creating the field. Okay, now we're building the portal, but in the next iteration, we have to step back and allow the others to go in and play in. That's where the value is realized in what we are doing. So in terms of sustainability, we have worked with the state-owned enterprise to create a subsidiary that will actually monetize on the DPIs. So that's a good one, and we have some targets for that. And of course, we are selling this to the Pacific, as my esteemed colleague from the East African has mentioned. So we are the biggest country in the Pacific region. Everyone else, like Fiji, is 1 million people. We are 12 million people, you know. So there's exactly no reason for us not to be deploying this. And you know, we have signed a declaration across the whole Pacific, and we were just going through the details and the nuances of that. So Hilda has just mentioned that, you know, it's how you coordinate and how you make standards, and you let the DPI implementation be specific to each of them. So and that's a big learning for me coming here. So, you know, unless you have targets and unless the targets determine your roadmap, and then the roadmap determine your partners, and then the approach that you need to take. So you have to know what you want when you're discussing DPIs before you come. Yeah. So for me, that's a very big learning, and I'm very keen on the journey ahead.
That's very powerful framing, very clean also as a takeaway, very clear. But let's say, I mean, coming to you, Ramesh, let's say the 4 countries around the world, around you here, as well as maybe a smattering of like 10 or 12 in the room, they all want to implement DPI now, and they have these ambitious targets similar to what Russell just shared. You know, you've come from the SaaS world, you've come from this growth journey of how software has changed in its implementation. What can that, you know, teach us about the ways in which to deploy DPI rapidly around the world?
See, in general, when you're talking about the DPI type of very deep platforms, it's important to understand what type of requirements you have, where you want to incrementally want to implement, rather than just trying to get into everything at one shot. It has to have some good structure and understanding some of the implementations here, and use this as a case studies, and use that as a reference playbook, and start comparing with your requirements, and then start as a first MVP, what is called the minimum viable product. And that definitely gives you a right foundation. When I say foundation, it has to be all the requirement, what is called as a foundation layer powered by DPI is very important. You don't want to get to the stage, middle of the implementation, and step back and redo again the foundation. It'll be too expensive, it'll be too time consuming, and the project won't be in a good reputation model. So most important, most of the times when I talk to my customers, where they use our platform as a platform, and with a lot of customization, that's another big element. Don't try to change too much definition of the functionality when you take the cat and convert it into line to convert into cat, because some of the features, it's designed to do certain things. Because you have such a good customization as the requirements, when you don't draw the line, when to use a vanilla, when to use a customization, more you go into more customization, that will only going to make you more expensive from a cost to serve standpoint, even from a duration standpoint.
Yeah.
So net, just build sometimes you need to go slow to go faster later, but if you rush it too much at the beginning, then your foundation won't be that good. That means whatever you build with a flaky foundation, you're only going to get into regression. You're only getting into frustration of the project. So get to know your requirements. Try to utilize the DPI as a platform as vanilla as possible, because that's designed as a platform. And balance your customization. When you look back 1 year from now, when the first version, phase 1 implementation is done, you should always be proud of what foundation you built it. So that's super important as you go along.
And it's actually a very, very powerful insight, because when we start building, we always want to add requirements based on what comes up, right? It's very tempting to say, oh, last week we had a flood. You know, let's make sure that there is, you know, extra data that's collected around, you know, groundwater levels nearby and so on, right? Onto whatever system you're building.
The key thing is implementation should not be completely changing the definition based on your greediness will be there, but you have to control your greediness.
Control your greed, this is a good
and
takeaway.
then just make sure you are not changing the behavior of the features, because it's all platform. When you're consuming the platform, it has to be API driven, and you also have to make sure the experience layer has to be well aligned to the platform capabilities. The moment you try to intersect into a different lane, the game is already in a wrong path.
Powerful. So don't do too much. Stay minimum core to the foundation and use the baseline packages for the foundation. Build on top, add on top later, but don't make that the roadblock in the first stage. It's a very powerful sort of set of lessons. But I think we should maybe move to some audience questions quickly now, so that we can get a chance, for folks here to raise a hand and direct any questions. Any thoughts you can also frame who you'd like to ask the question to. Yep, I see a gentleman in the blue shirt.
Yeah, thank you very much for your perspectives. I would like to know what are the difficulties you have experienced in implementing digital identities?
Maybe Monsieur Boutayeb, and maybe you can cover Russell as well. Yeah.
Maybe I can go first because a lot of problems.
In 10 weeks, you also had problems too?
Yes, you'll be surprised how much problems there are. Yeah, so when you are selecting especially your solution architecture, that's something, because if you are selecting, like for us, a low-code solution, many of them are ClickOps based. They are, server-based architectures. And if you have your cloud infrastructure, we have a sovereign cloud infrastructure that is, so your system integrator is very key because it allows you to align. Otherwise, you'll keep engaging an intermediary to make sure that it converts the different architectures together. So, that's something that we are even facing, trying to make sure that whichever solution you pick, the infrastructure by which you are deploying your solution is actually aligned to whichever you've chosen. So I think that's a big lesson for me going back tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll have to go and fix that.
Powerful. Monsieur, you want to?
Yes, difficulties in building this ID system weren't technical. I faced difficulties with two competition with another ID system based on a card. So I said, it's a new thing. There is no card. It's just digital. But we had to negotiate, and it takes time. The second is we wrote a law parallelly to the building of our system, and before I went to the parliament to explain and to get this law approved, I had the data protection or authority that came and tried to change things and unfortunately for me, the president of this data was an IT guy, so he wasn't discussing about where I am infringing his law, the law of data protection, but he wanted to talk about architecture. So I didn't accept, and we stopped more or less during 6 or 7 months. We just shut off the system, and I wait until I have green light for above this authority to come. That's the problem. It's not technical. Technical, we didn't have really problems because we did that well, and each step we did what you say. We have our specification from the beginning. We know where we are going, and we didn't add as we go things. And we did this pilot, and we have this experience here because it gives us confidence. 1 billion and 200 million at that time versus 35 million. So, but the problem wasn't technical.
I see. Very powerful lesson. Kamal, you want to?
Technically, I just like to take 1 minute to actually, to explore your question. Basically, in Nepal, we face two basic problems, during the implementation of the national ID system. One is the data ownership problem and data custodian problem. The community or the institution which collect data for one specific purpose cannot be shared with the other purpose, as per the legal framework within the country. That's the major obstacle we faced. And then I think it takes a long time to change the legal framework because we need to convince our policymaker, legal, parliamentarian. That's why it takes a long time. I think this is one obstacle. And other obstacle we face is the data exchange. The data exchange, and there must be some key information. This need to be actually exchanged among the other entities. Yeah. For example, the data collected for the election purpose could not be shared for the other purpose. And the data collected for the national ID purpose could not be shared with the other service like social security purpose or the driving license purpose.
Yeah.
This is the case. That's why we need to think before implementing national ID. This framework should be clear, and then there should be no legal binding and legal constraint in order to operate the whole ecosystem smoothly.
Makes sense. Yeah, go ahead. You have a question.
Good evening. My name is Vinay. I'm a foreign policy researcher based in Bangalore. My question is to the panelists from Africa and PNG. How much of your work is caught up in the Cold War between the US and China? Is it difficult to surmount? Is it difficult to even acknowledge in public? Thank you.
Do we need to take a short break? No, I'm just joking. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the important thing for these countries is to know what you really want. Once you know what you really want, you'll know who is the right partner to go with. So I think that's the most important thing. So either it's the Chinese who will be able to help on this case, you need to look on the opportunities and challenges of that, and it's either the US. So I think mostly is knowing what you want ahead of time and go with the right partner. So it's case by case basis. So thank you.
Russell?
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with my esteemed colleague. We are very fortunate. We had a lot of support from the Australian government, and I acknowledge my esteemed colleague from Delhi who's here as well. The Australian government helped us with the policy frameworks. We visited Singapore, we visited Estonia, of course India, and then we saw all the government technology stack, and we said which one best suits us on our context. So that's essentially what you do. China is what it can offer. The US has a lot to offer, the traditional partner. So we are very, very happy with what we have. Actually, the US government is actually funding our project manager position, and I just want to thank the US government for their support.
Wonderful. Yeah. I think we're just about at time, but as a last phrase or last word from everyone, or in this case, let's do a last number. One number, an ambitious number that you think you'll be able to achieve with the DPI approach that you don't think you could have achieved without it, maybe. Should we try that? I heard Russell give some targets, but who wants to go first? Maybe anyone want to strike? Yeah.
Lower the cash by 70%.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, you want to try?
No, before I answer that question, one thing I kind of slipped while I was giving some of the recommendations and best practices. You are dealing DPI with a very sensitive API calls. The data and the security and privacy is so important. And make sure while you're focusing on what you need to focus, also pay attention on your sensitivity of the data you're carrying. That's a huge responsibility, and it's a huge accountability too. So that's one thing I want to remind everyone.
And last number, we'll push you on the number.
Last number is, 150 million user traffic, how we want to really make it power.
Fantastic, okay. Hilda, for EAC, last number?
Yeah, so I think allowing or facilitating the movement of people and goods and services, 80% at least.
80%, lovely, fantastic. Kamal, last number?
I think because of the increasing digital literacy in my country, I think around 60% have already transacted through the banking, financial transaction through banking account. and mobile banking system. That's why I think cross-border transaction that we recently established the memorandum between India and Nepal. I think it has already enforced, but it is one way only, because the Indian can actually enjoy in Nepal. They can pay from the phone pay or UPI system, but in Nepal we cannot pay. That's why I hope
cross-border transactions
transaction is one greater milestone after this DPI.
Lovely. Okay, and Russell, we heard yours earlier, but
Yeah, so I'm going to summarize it now. So it's the power of one.
One.
If you can get one citizen to benefit.
Wow,
The citizen doesn't need to stand in line. The citizen can vote online. Doesn't need to do all this. Then we've done our job.
That's a fantastic note to end on. Thank you, everybody, for your attention today.
Our last session today, a panel on open source AI for the Global South, will dive into the potential of open source AI to democratize technology access, drive innovation, and foster transparency, particularly for the Global South. Request everyone to please stay in the room for this last focused discussion on AI. The panelists are Melinda Claiborne, Director of Privacy Policy, Meta; Kishore Balaji Desikachari, Executive Director, Government and Regulatory Affairs, IBM India and South Asia; Saurabh Khan, Founding Member, Sarvam AI; Juni Tan, Senior Research Associate, Khazana Research Institute; Mike Bracken, Partner, Public Digital. The panel will be moderated by Rahul Mathan, Partner, Trilegal.
Seth mentioned Peak Bangalore. Peak Bangalore is a full house for the last panel before dinner. It's either that this panel is excellent, which is what I'd like to believe, or free dinner is something that Peak Bangalore never misses. Either way, we are clearly in the way between you and dinner, so we'll get straight into it. I, unlike Kamya, was not asked to say anything, but everyone in the room who knows me knows that if you give me a mic, I can't resist. So I'm going to basically set the stage for what we're going to discuss. I really wanted to have a cage match style battle between proprietary AI and open source AI. That's not going to happen. As you can see, we're very much team open source AI on stage. So I'm going to start by sort of setting out perhaps what the contours of this battle is. We all loved this ChatGPT moment that happened when suddenly we had this really miraculous chatbot that would answer pretty much anything that we threw at it in very interesting, mysterious ways. They would give us things back in the style of Shakespeare and in Limerick. And the concern that people started to express was that this particular form of delivery of AI, miraculous as it is largely controlled by entities that are opaque and don't really provide the nuts and bolts of how this miraculous thing works. And there was a pushback from a community of builders that said, we've got to be more transparent with what we build. And then the proprietary guys came up and said, but this is an extremely dangerous technology. And you've got to trust the safety of that technology to people who really understand how it works. And so that, in a sense, is where this stage is set. And since there's no proprietary AI person on stage, I'm going to just say, I'm going to aim this at Melinda and Kishore to start with. What's so good about open source AI that the proprietary guys, first of all, are the proprietary guys right? Is this a more dangerous way to build AI? And what's the benefit? Everyone's free right now. I mean, you don't have to do ChatGPT Plus, but you can get a lot out of ChatGPT. So it can't be price. So what's so good about it, and why is it not as dangerous as the proprietary guys tell us? Can I start with you, Melinda, and then over to you, Kishore?
Sure. Hello? Okay.
It'll come on from...
Okay, I see. Thanks for the question. So I'm from Meta, and just to set a little context, I'm sure folks are aware of our Llama family of models, but we've been releasing variations of our Llama model every few months for the past year, 2 years. And so our most recent, in July we released the largest frontier open model in July, and then in September we released some variations on the model that are smaller and that are multimodal. And so we have now a family of models that can be used in a variety of ways for different purposes. To your specific question, I think the safety argument, or the safety argument, the idea that open models are less safe is false, and it's a bit of a distraction and a red herring, which is not to say, just to be clear, that we shouldn't take safety seriously. We do take safety seriously in the development of our Llama family of models, in the resources that we provide for developers. We provide safeguards that developers can build with. We provide responsible use guide, transparency tools, research papers. Everything you want to know about the model, you can know about the model and develop it on it responsibly. So safety is important, but is not the only factor. And this is where we get to the upsides. And I think, obviously, we are all in on open source, and we think there are just tremendous upsides to it. So just to level set, we are not a company that is going to, AI is not our business model, right? Unlike some closed companies, they are making money by selling AI, we are not. And so, but we do have an interest, a meta interest in developing AI. We don't want to be closed into someone else's proprietary system. We want to retain optionality. So it is very important for us to support and develop the ecosystem based on our model, right? Those benefits flow back to us. If people are building on our models, they are developing improvements, they are identifying risks, identifying other aspects of the model that we should be aware of, that all flows back to us and we can make improvements. So it's like Android, right? We want to be the operating system essentially for AI. And so, but beyond that, I think it's important to just say that because people want to know, well, what's in it for Meta? But beyond that, I think, a lot of developers in the room, right? I think what we hear consistently, what is important to developers is that ability to customize, to be able to add data, to be able to fine tune, to be able to build for the very specific context and applications that are relevant in your communities, your countries. And that level of customization is what really makes open source so powerful. And then beyond that, for society, there's a lot of benefits. So you talked about competitive aspects. So open source enables anyone to build with a little expertise and some resources, but largely allows anyone to build on a world-class model, right? You don't need a lot of compute, you don't need a lot of high-powered resources, you just grab it and go. That enables a range of folks to benefit from the model who normally price would be a barrier. They'd be priced out. And then with that comes other knock-on benefits. So in addition to enabling competition in the marketplace, it allows innovation to speed more quickly. Not everyone is starting from 0. People are starting from 100 and then building. And then beyond that is the economic development that comes with that innovation. So I think it's really, if you call it a stack of benefits of open source, from our company to developers to society at large, not to mention, of course, just the digital development knock-on benefits that come globally in the Global South.
So, Kishore, I'm going to move to you on pretty much the same question, because you're also, as a company, very you bought into this idea of open. But more from the innovation, collaboration, democratization perspective, why does this allow you to do that? Just to say that you can still use many of the proprietary models to do a lot of these things. And so what's sort of the added advantage of it?
Sure. So firstly, pleasure talking to you all. Good evening. So firstly, I think like you began with saying, there's been this debate about one monolith versus open for a while, and mostly the ecosystem seems to be settling for more open. And also, no conference ever starts in AI without speaking about the opportunity and the trade-off. And good to see that India is probably considering, taking the opportunity route while beginning to look at risks and how to mitigate risk. Now, in that context, I think more or less the policy group agrees that we're looking at, regulating the risks in a certain way, where we speak of precision regulation, where we speak of adopting responsible AI with a focus on safety, trust, and governance. And broadly, I think we're also mostly agreeing to how developer and deployer and distributor responsibilities get plugged. Now, the beauty of open source is, if not all, several of these concepts can be well managed in an open source community. We believe if you put a model and a solution in front of more bodies and more eyes looking at it, the chances are that the model is safer. Right? So that's fundamentally what I think about it. Now, at IBM, we've had a reasonably long history of supporting open source. I mean, Linux and Java and what have you. And I think transformational technologies like the internet and whatever have benefited from open source. And AI being such a transformative opportunity in itself, we strongly advocate for open. Now, as we say we advocate for open, at multiple layers we are practicing adoption of open. For example, today at IBM, the Watson X uses a lot of open source tools and technologies. The Watson X platform hosts a whole host of our partner open source models. Now, beyond that, we're also engaged in developing the open community. I think in December last year, Meta, us, and 50 other organizations signed up the OpenAI Alliance. I'm glad to get it to your notice that earlier this month, we brought that to India as the India chapter. And we've had folks like Sarvam, IIT Jodhpur, IIT Chennai, Infosys, and a few other come together. So I think the ecosystem is building up, and we will see a whole host of more traction as we go on that will allow us to answer some of the fundamental questions that I brought about earlier. And not only that, I think we're also coming together to work with governments to see how the benefits of open source can be reached to the ecosystem. In fact, later last year, October last year, we signed some agreements with the government of India to make Watson X available through CDAC to all of the community, and that's work in progress. So those are ways we are demonstrating how the benefits of open could reach to all. That said, of course, like Melinda was beginning to say, open brings down the barriers to entry. It creates a more competitive marketplace. It allows for entrepreneurs to consider local context and focus on solutions rather than looking at models and so on and so forth, the time to market, especially for Global South, where I think one of the previous speakers eloquently spoke of barriers that we're hitting in terms of language and what have you can easily be solved. So I think that those are benefits that open source truly bring. That apart, I think open source also democratizes model making, right? I mean, last month, Red Hat, which is an IBM company, and us, we announced an initiative called Expert Labs, where, I mean, conventionally you would have to take a model, fork it, train it on your data, but the fork remains. But here is a program where, people are invited, they can come and contribute their skill, their knowledge, and they can have a model by itself. So those are significant benefits that, open source brings. Of course, happy to kind of chat more. Thank you.
There's a bunch in there that I want to unpick, but I want to give everyone the opportunity to make sort of opening remarks. And I want to turn to you, Mike. You've been variously described as the CTO of the UK, and so you have very much, a good friend of yours has told me that you are the CTO of the UK. And as someone in the public sector, how does this open versus closed issue play out? I would imagine that the public sector would be happy to take an open source version over a proprietary version. At least that's what every government says. But just in terms of the real trade-offs that you have to, as a public official deal with, price, economics versus social impact, how would you think about that? And you promised you'd be controversial, so we've got to wake the audience up.
Thank you. No, thank you, Rahul. And thank you for the invitation to Rudran, Carnegie, everyone here. I wasn't the CTO, I was the head of the technology profession for the UK government, and the head of the first digital unit and the first chief data officer for the UK. So technically not a CTO.
I don't know, Mike. That sounds pretty CTO-ish to me.
That was enough. I guess, you asked me about how does this, I'm going to try and answer the question, how does this feel for policymakers? I work at Public Digital. We're a consultancy. We help governments, large institutions, global institutions, some private, some public, with digital transformation at scale. So we advise politicians, and with Avashi and others here, help people like Macron and others with sort of grappling with these issues. So there's no sort of easy answer to some of this. How do I feel about it? Or I feel old is how I feel about it. And in all the hype and all the change, I think it's important to think from a policymaker's point of view, what's changed and what's not changed. How do I feel about open versus proprietary? Well, I think it's a false dynamic. We were discussing earlier, it's about 60 years since the first antitrust case split up IBM from its software and hardware business. I was reading just before that the US regulator might try again with Google. It feels like nothing changes. I think it's a false premise that we're trying open source. We're not, in my opinion. I'm with Christine Peterson. If you want a definition of open source, we have one. It's been valid for 30 years. This is not open source. If you want to be open, you open up the weights, the models, the data, a lot. I'm not convinced. I would be convinced, happily be so, but I'm not yet convinced that that the potential threat of a bad actor is a good enough reason not to do that. I've not seen any evidence of that's the case. I would happily look at it if it were open. I recognize the slight problem with that statement, that you'd have to do it first. So my advice to policymakers really is to firstly have a long think about what is open. Last time I talked to Pramod in the summer, if we had one in the UK, I can't remember. It was raining again. My view of DPI and openness was that this is relatively small in terms of cost, modular. The Indian experience would come today with the hyperscalers, US government, and so on. There's a changing characteristics of there. I've been around long enough to remember many companies, some here on this stage and elsewhere, lobbying aggressively against open source. I've had some of those people apologize for their conduct about that lobbying, the securocrat industry, telling governments never to adopt open source. Bill Gates was at it in 1976 with a letter to the hackers. Steve Ballmer called it a benign cancer just, a little while ago. We have to remember this. This is an ahistorical issue. The idea that there's some sort of massive inflection point now and everything's new is not the case. One of the choices we face is to really double down on a sort of centrist, large platform view of the world with all the attendant surveillance issues that come with that. That's not necessarily wrong or bad, but I think we have to look at it as it is, not as we would like it to be. So My advice to policymakers is really, think hard about that. In G7 countries, I'll take the UK as an example, most policymakers actually don't have the freedom that policymakers in the South have. And the reason is that the environment they work in is not open. I'm with Fran Bennett from the Ada Lovelace Institute, and she defines AI at the moment as mostly DevOps most of the time, because that's what you actually have to do. And most policymakers I talk to in G7 countries are dealing with closed proprietary legacy systems. And they don't actually have the freedom to act that we might think they do. I think policymakers in the South, by definition of not having the legacy, not having the money, they have, and Pramod's shown this, you have a huge freedom to act. And my advice would be cautious about that freedom. It's not an easy answer. You know that. There is a Faustian pact to be made here. But there's a huge, huge opportunity. India's shown the way. I am massively optimistic about India's ability to demonstrate what good public policy can be in this space. But to give you an idea of, a final point I'll say to policymakers is, follow the money. We looked recently at some numbers from Gartner. If you take the sort of, I don't know what the right phrase is these days, but like China, Western Europe, North America, out of the equation, they spend about $250 per person per year on government spending on technology. The rest of the world gets 14. You don't get much money for that. If you want to equalize that this year, just for 1 year, you've got to find $1.3 trillion. That's 7x more than the global contribution from all the international agencies. So that's not going to happen. The legacy play can't work, which means that there just simply isn't the money to do that. You know that. So the question for policymakers is, what degree of open do you want? Do you really want open source? Do you want this sort of pretend open source, half open that we've got now, which got a load of benefits, by the way. It's good, but we have to really have that debate, and there has to be some money behind that debate to understand the value of it. There isn't a business case model for these things for public policy officials. I wish there were. So it's going to be really important that we work it out. One thing anyone who predicts the future in this space is a fool, and I'm not going to try and do that. But one thing I do know is that I'd put money on that, a more successful model of that prediction coming from the South and the North right now. Is that controversial enough?
Not as much as I know you can be, so I'm going to give you a second bite of the cherry. But I'm going to first, since you already pivoted the conversation away from just open source to open source for the Global South, I'm going to move to Junai, because you've got a report out on AI governance or governance of AI in the Malaysia. Well, then you can give us a sneak peek of what the findings are in Malaysia, but if you could just extend it more to the Global South and how that would benefit.
Okay, so I'm Junai. I'm a Senior Research Associate from Khazanah Research Institute, a policy think tank in Malaysia. And I work in the digital and tech policy team, and I focus on AI governance. So I'm going to first talk about how Malaysian stakeholders look at AI risk, which I think pretty much probably does extend to other global South country players as well. And then after that, circle back into the open source AI piece, right? So for that, I'll have to talk a little bit about our AI impact and governance study that we started this year, and we're going to publish a paper on it by the end of this year. And during the study, we talked to 21 key stakeholders within the Malaysian AI policy scene, covering government actors, also private sector and the CSOs, academia. And just to provide a bit of context about Malaysian AI landscape, we're 23rd on the Government AI Readiness Index. And we have an AI strategy, and we're also opening up a national AI office in November. So the actors are anxious about the situation, really. And so for this study, we asked them 3 main questions. One is, what is AI risk to you? The second is, what do you see as governance challenges? And the third is, what do you see as feasible pathways forward? So I'm just going to focus on the AI risk piece. And through these conversations that we had with our 21 key stakeholders, we kind of came up with a typology of sorts, so 3 buckets of main ways that people consider AI risk. And so the first one is really the risk of not adopting AI. So the risk of, or not adopting AI quick enough. So this will cover, the fear of being left behind, the fear of losing out on economic opportunities, or even, health benefits and all that. And second would be the problem of unsafe AI, unintended consequences of AI. So that doesn't really cover intent. So it's just really how bad design and not thinking far enough would bring you some certain risks that are connected with AI. And thirdly would be with bad intent, right? Weaponization of AI for criminal use or AI in warfare and things like that. So these are the three main buckets of AI risks that come up over and over again in our conversations with the stakeholders. But there's also this other bucket also, which is more a fundamental thing. When we talk about AI risk, there's a bucket of conversations that is not so much directly AI risk, but more on the lack of readiness to deal with these risks, right? So if you're not ready, you won't be able to adopt the technology well enough, right, to reap the benefits. If you're not ready, you won't be able to deal with the consequences of unsafe AI or innate tech risks or systemic risks that comes from inequality, problems with democratic processes that are being affected, just unintended consequences. And thirdly, on how to really look at bad actors within the scene. If you're not ready, you're not going to be able to handle those. So to break it up even into smaller pieces of the readiness piece. So there is the need for governance structures and regulatory frameworks. Of course, we do have existing frameworks, but they have to be tweaked to be fit for purpose. And given that AI and AI governance is cross-border, so that also is something of a readiness problem. How do we actually now go global in our advocacy, in where we want AI to be? And secondly, you can talk about capacity. We not only lack the technical capacity, but also the legal capacity or the social scientific capacity at both the human resources level, the talent level, and also at the state level, right? Because you need policymakers and bureaucrats and all of that to be able to handle what's coming, given the impacts of AI. And then there's also, of course, awareness of what AI is, awareness of the risks that come with AI, and then lastly, resources, right? For us to coordinate and for us to meaningfully make something out of AI, we will need computational resources, we'll need money, really. So that is just to give you like a framework of how countries from the Global South can consider AI risk. And using Malaysia as a case. And then going back to open source AI, right? So I agree with Mike on the definitions, but I'm just gonna have a general piece about this on how if you look at open foundational models, there's gonna be like 5 distinct properties that leads both to risks and opportunities. So I'm just going to read from this list that I copied from the Model Openness Framework paper by White et al., which looks at broader access as being a risk or opportunity, greater customizability, local adaptation and inference ability, inability to rescind model access, and inability to monitor or moderate model usage. So I think that that's broadly, what we can agree on that are so-called benefits or risks that will come from these properties of open source AI. And so linking this back to what I had talked about before on AI risk and how the Global South can be thinking about these risks and of the readiness piece that will really exacerbate the risks whether effective adoption or on unsafe or AI or unintended consequences or weaponization of AI. So whether they are risks or opportunities, these 5 things coming from open source AI, it will really depend on the readiness. And the Global South could use the support on resources, like what was proposed in the latest UN Governing AI for Humanity report, which actually called for a global AI fund to support developing countries and contexts to actually reap the benefits of AI. I think that would be a good place to start, and sorry to move it to that direction, but I do think that is connected to the open source argument that we have here. Thank you.
So I just was, like in Jerry Maguire, you had me at hello. It was the first thing that you said was so evocative of the Global South, which is the risk of not participating in AI. That, I think, just resonates all over. And just to illustrate that, I want to bring Saurabh, because if there is ever an example of quick off quick off the ropes, what is it? I don't know. Quick to start was what Saurabh built when he was at OpenAI. And I really want you to talk about now the use cases, because everyone says India is the use case capital of AI, and how open fits into that framework. But I don't know how many in the audience know about Jugalbandi. Maybe just very briefly talk about that, and then also what you're building in Server.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. I'll probably start with the same definition of open source and then probably take it from there, right? I think, as Mike said, there's a spectrum of open source, and what we call open source is most likely like open weights in that sense, right? Like, so let me put a contour to it, right? The license around some of these models are fairly permissive, allowing you to use it for a lot of use cases, right? As a company, what we do is we focus a lot on voice. We focus a lot on knowledge worker productivity. And one of the core charters of our organization is to build sovereign AI. Your data, your compute, your GPUs, right? So this is the contours of my work, right? Now, what Rahul was talking about is Jugalbandi, something that I had a chance to build during my not-for-profit life. And within 1 week of launch of ChatGPT, we had created a WhatsApp bot which could use open source voice models built by Indian academia, which works with ChatGPT, works off of the knowledge base of government schemes. And now suddenly a farmer in Haryana can ask questions like, I want to build a house, how can government help me? Right? So what you have done is you have probably taken all these search requirements and everything to having like need-based search. And for the farmer, it is essentially talking to like an agent. But the kind of impact that it would have on the lives of a lot of people in India who still survive on welfare and whose potential can significantly be unlocked by use of these technologies, right? So this is something that we had built, and we were able to ship it out. Like we built it practically in a day, right? Like, so that's how fast we were able to sort of like ship it out. And then we have seen like adaptation of similar technology. Retrieval augmented generation has become a very, very common technique 2 years down the line. And now you also have a lot of alternates to ChatGPT when you're building some of these voice models, right? So when we think about these open source models in the Global South context, I mean, why Global South, right? Like in any context for that matter, right? You can take a bunch of these models, and the unique opportunity that India provides is that we need to be able to deploy it to 1.4 billion people, right? Now, if you need to deploy it to 1.4 billion people, you cannot rely on a proprietary model. One, because economics is not going to work out, right? There is no government budget line item that's going to have that much amount of money, right? So you need to have control over models. And why do you need control over those models, right? Because once you have control over those models, you can prune it, you can optimize it, you can ensure that it can be served at a very, very low cost with very, very low latency to a really large number of people at a cost point where the services costs go down, right? this is not just to say that the welfare is going to become easy, right? Like Indian enterprises deals with like millions of people, right? Like there are very few geographies which provides you with an opportunity to be interacting with your end customers, like of the scale of like, you know, a couple of million people every day, right? And now think about those organizations. For businesses to work very, very effectively, they need to be talking to Indians in their language, right? Like, so as a company, if I speak English, right, like I can't be explaining my distributor who is probably a Telugu speaking person, right? Like that this is what needs to be done. And that's why you need multilingual models, right? Now, a bunch of these models, which are off-the-shelf open source available, right? They do not have very good multilingual capability. Now, imagine if you had proprietary systems, right? The onus on improving on language would lie on that organization. Now, because you have open weights model, organizations like Servam and many others are able to gather a lot of data, which is otherwise not available on internet, improve on these models, serve applications at a very, very low cost to a really large number of Indians. And that's why when we think about like the opportunity and the risk, right? Like I think India has lapped onto the opportunity side of things. With the very clear acknowledgement that there are risks associated, and that's why we have a lot of focus on guardrails, we have a lot of focus on security, and very honestly, right, like let me share an example actually, because that's what we wanted to talk. So when we started doing one of the initial pilots of you know, having these voice bot models served to domestic workers in Bangalore, served to you know, waste pickers in Bangalore, right? Like really going after the end line in some sense, right? We had very interesting observations. So this was a government scheme bot. Obviously, like people were very, very happy, and the women reacted very differently, right? So contrary to the larger belief, women actually found these systems to be much more private, because in the absence of AI technology, they would otherwise have to rely on their husbands, their children, for them to even understand that there's a scholarship scheme for their daughters, right? So one, how people react to these technology is very, very different. But at the same time, once they know that there's a government scheme, the next thing that they want is like, don't send me to that line to apply for it. And the moment you say that, what you have to do is you have to bring all the government machinery on that mobile phone so that this person does not have to move and still can enjoy the government benefit. Now think about what is the data that's flowing in, right? So you have to bake in security, you have to bake in a lot of guardrails, you have to scope down what you are trying to do. But all of this is possible because you have open weights model, which otherwise would have taken a couple of $1 million for us to build. Now we are able to leverage that. We have a leg up on those side of things, and we are able to customize it to our need, right? So this sovereignty that my data, my compute, my GPU is a need across India, right? Like from people who need welfare the most, to the enterprises, to the governments who are probably again serving those people, right? So I think that's how we see this play out.
So, Mike, I want to come back to you because what Saurabh is talking about, since he's talking so much about AI applications in government, I just want to, the way he's speaking is vertical use cases, which seem to be fundamentally modular. And a lot of what we've discussed over the last 2-3 days is, the hyperscalers are in the room. Do we need to use hyperscalers to push this out? I think, Meta AI is available to everyone. You can go to Meta AI and use it. So this is the use case of the big AI platforms seem to be very different from the use case of government, which has to be smaller and more modular. And I just want to see if that resonates with you and what your thoughts are around open in that context, and is that as flexibly applicable to government?
I don't think, it's not an either-or construct. I think everyone's got their place. I guess the issues for government, I mean, I completely support and applaud your approach and what you're doing, because that approach really, I think, helps governments get closer to solving public policy issues that are localized, more context, and have local flavor than any other approach. In doing so, I think you need a wide variety of providers, both whether it's all the way up from compute, data, services, applications, the lot. The inherent problem is that the bias in any system is compounded hugely when you're using platform services all the time. So, they're largely, white, English, and full of biases, so just like me, but they're not, they're not the answer to everything. And of course, they trap in a lot of biases and also a lot of assumptions about, or there's a lot of locking with them. So I think you need to develop your own to many degrees. I think one of the things I would say is that we're in the first wave of this in the sort of logic and how this is presented back to government. Is a lot of the logic is like, you have to do it this way. It is and will become the only way it can be done in a big platform way. And I understand that to some degree, but that sort of technological determinism, I just fundamentally disagree with that. We've got to not see the future platform structures of this stuff as an oligopoly. Like, that's just not going to help in the long term. So, as I said before, I think the opportunities are huge for everyone. There's room for everyone to play, but there's got to be a clear understanding. And really, what the job of governments, and I'd say less so the industry, is market shaping. Is really understanding. You talked about, Pramod talked about the market, and you talk about a particular market here, and there's been amazing success stories of market players here doing stuff, and that doesn't preclude, by the way, the bigger companies also doing great stuff. The point is, the market here is very, very different to other markets, and that is a job for public policy officials in each country. And I come from a country where that market, whether it be health or central technology or data, is so bent out of shape that just to assume that there's one answer to that is going to take us nowhere. But I let 1,000 flowers bloom and try and have as much as you can a sovereign set of infrastructure, data, compute, and applications. And from that, we will learn.
Melinda, there's been, I think Mike, Juni, sort of all spoke about different definitions of open. Open weights, open data, open source, which has its own definition in from time immemorial. So could you unpack that a bit for us? What really do we mean by this open word that we're now associating as opposed to proprietary AI?
Yeah, I think that we are getting stuck in a binary. And I think that there is an historic ideological divide and debate here. And so I know the criticism of Meta that, well, we make our model weights available. We don't make our training data and our code widely available. And so then we're not, I think it's a distraction from the larger conversation which needs to happen, which is specifically around what are the gradients? What exactly is possible from fully proprietary and closed to fully open? There are different solutions for different problems, what type of customization do you want? What type of protections do you want? What is important? I think it's not important to figure out the definition and make sure everyone agrees with it. I think what's important is the range of solutions, and then more importantly, the range of policy interventions, right? So when you understand the full spectrum of open to closed, then what are maybe the mitigations? What are the responsibilities we want to put in place? If you're working with a fully closed model, then maybe more responsibility goes on the developer. If you're working in a more open space, then maybe more responsibility for certain things goes just on the deployer, right? So what are we talking? I think to get to the granularity around responsible governance, we have to get to the granularity around the spectrum and get away from trying to land on a definition that everyone's going to be happy with.
And I just also want to talk now about some of the other governance challenges with AI generally, and how that is different in the context of an open model. So for instance, we've had this big lawsuit that the New York Times brought against OpenAI for copyright infringement. There are questions around personal data. Of course, when you go to a closed proprietary model, I think I don't know if it's easier to address these things, but I would imagine that there are additional complexities with an open model that's now out in the wild. I guess with warts and all, it's now being used. So I don't know if, Kishore, you want to pick that one up. Are there any differences and nuances in the way in which governance challenges with general AI is also applied to OpenAI. And just to throw another one in there, and either Melinda, you or Kishore can pick it up, is just this thing about open source and the geopolitical risk that people are thinking is attributed to it, which could see some sort of a lockdown on exporting these models. So, between the two of you, if you could just pick that up, and then I'll go to Junai and Saurabh on, what are the consequences of a potential lockdown?
Yeah, so I'll try and get to it, and then I'll invite Melinda to kind of add on to that. So fundamentally, I think the biggest challenge for adoption of AI of any sorts is the pace at which it's moving and the pace at which regulations are trying to catch up. So that remains at the core of, the issue, right? There are, of course, known issues like licensing that you brought up. But hindsight, when you look at it, I still look at open as a way to truly mitigate some of the challenges that closed may have, especially from a security perspective. Now, closer home, if you look at how some countries like, let's say, Singapore have addressed it. So there is this, Verify AI consortium in Singapore, which has folks like IBM, Microsoft, Google, and who have you. And now they're beginning to look at how to set up testing, how to set up standards, and so on and so forth. Now, those benefit sets are far more to accrue than some of these risks. That'll be my thought, but invite Melinda to kind of add on.
So do you want to take that or
dig into the
export control?
Well, just real quick on the regulation piece that you raised. I mean, I think that I don't know that there is an extreme distinction between closed and open necessarily. So everyone developing models, every model is going to face issues around data privacy, around copyright. I mean, these are problems that are just inherent to the technology that I think that we need to focus on adapting existing legal structures and making sure they're fit for purpose in this world. So I'm thinking particularly around in the data privacy regime, where some of the core concepts that we've seen proliferate over the last decades are directly in tension, like data minimization or purpose limitation concepts, directly in tension with AI and what is needed for the development of AI. So I put in a plug for, if we get to the legal frameworks of it all, but for revisiting existing structures and looking at them fresh in light of AI. On the export controls, I think that this is an idea that's been floating around the specter of export controls. I think that it is a real threat to AI development, and I also think it's a solution. It's not an apt solution to the concern. And so I think what we need to do is think about the goals of AI development and how do we meet them globally, rather than lock down technology. How do we put good technology out there? The way to combat bad technology or the threat of technology that doesn't align with our values is to put good technology that does align with our values out there.
Junai, I want to just go to what you started with, which, really, beyond that first thing, I couldn't focus on anything else you said, because there's this whole risk versus opportunity dichotomy. And I sense, having spent a lot of time speaking to Europe and perhaps some parts of the US on risk versus opportunity, and risks seem to overweigh opportunity. But the Global South, having spent a lot of time here, sees the opportunity being worth some greater level of risk, perhaps, than the West is willing to take. And I just wondered, which is right? And, as Mike says, both have their place. But do you, in your research, feel that there is some difference between the way we think about this, and how does the Global South approach? Are we willing to take on more risk because the opportunity for us is greater, or the need for us is greater? Is there a baseline that we all recognize and willing to forego opportunity because of that risk? I'm just trying to figure out in your research where you've ended up on that.
So in Malaysia, we did actually have a roundtable of our own to kind of corroborate and discuss the initial findings of this study. And we did throw a question out there via Slido to our participants, which would be their main concern out of these three: the risk of not adopting quick enough, or unsafe AI / unintended consequences of AI, or weaponization of AI. And the results from 35 responses, very, very unrepresentative, was that people were most concerned about unsafe AI, unintended consequences. So take what you will from that. And I think that we need to recognize that the Global South is a very heterogeneous and diverse group of countries, and within which is a very heterogeneous and diverse set of communities with different priorities and interests. So like within Malaysia, we can see like either end of the spectrum. For instance, we have a local startup looking at building, or they already have built a large language model. And they did say within the media interview that it would not have been possible without open source AI. So that is a company that has taken the step towards using what's available. But at the same time, the legal affairs of the Prime Minister's Department of Malaysia, they're already thinking about looking at an online safety act, looking at child safety, and how to combat scams online, and then problematic content. And then they're also looking at amending the penal code to handle like cyberbullying and things like that. So already you see some variation, right, of who's going to be having a larger risk appetite and who's going to be a little bit more conservative. And I think that I would also like to bring up Singapore's approach in a way. When they have an AI readiness index, and it's a strategic way for them to actually locate companies who are AI ready, and then connect them to talent and all of that. And when looking at their videos, one of the things that jumped out at me was that they're not looking at targeting everyone to adopt AI. Because some people will not be ready, some people will not be interested even, and that's okay. They're just going to look for companies that want to adopt and can find a use case for it, and then adopt strategically. So I think that there is something to be said about what exactly are we using AI for, and then so if we already have the problem there, then what types of models will be suitable? Like what Belinda was saying just now, that you have a variety of options, and from there you use it as is needed, fit for your use case, and not being like, okay, let's just adopt for the sake of progress, and it's going to be a better future for us if we do. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. Yeah.
I think we've got like time for a few audience questions. I have one last question. I see hands up already. I have one last question for you, Saurabh. And so if you can just tee your questions up. This is in, you mentioned RAG, and I think one of the big concerns that I have with AI development happening in the global north is that it perhaps lacks some of the context that is needed in the global south. And I wondered whether you could just spend a little time talking about context and the role that open or proprietary AI context plays in the context of open or proprietary AI.
I was writing something very different.
But, you can say that as well. It's fine.
No, I think there are a couple of things that I want to say before I take this one, right? Like one, I think you won't be able to apply retrospective export regulations on open source models. It'll be very hard to go back and like stop people from using what is available out there on torrent.
I agree with that. But look, right? At some point in time, the models that are export controlled, if we go down that path, will be the models you want to use. And if that happens, it is a serious problem. So I agree, you can't retrospectively do it. So we're happy with the 405 billion parameters that Meta has already put out for us. But then there'll be some really cool, other capabilities.
Exactly, and that's why I want to distinguish between the models that we need versus the frontier models, right? So there is a delta between that. And second, I think the foundational models, I think even if you look at it from the beginning of ChatGPT era, so to say, right? Like we have seen TI Dubai build foundational model Falcon. We have seen Mistral coming out of France, right? Like so, there are a lot of other countries who are building foundational models. India has its own foundational model, Servam 2 billion parameter model, built completely using Indian resources by India from scratch, right? So what we are focusing on is securing ourselves in that sense. Having said that, I think when we look at building some of these models, these are like enormously expensive, technically very hard to achieve kind of a thing. And that's why we look at it from like a purpose-built perspective, so to say, right? So, so I just wanted to make a distinction that we are talking about frontier models, right? Like where you would apply export regulations very differently, where you might restrict them already closed models to not have APIs being served in certain countries and things like that. But again, there are countries which are building their own foundational models themselves for their own need. Sorry, what was the question?
Context.
Context. Indian context is a very important part because as what Mike also said, right? Like when you take a lot of internet data, you also take a lot of internet biases with it. And when you train some of these models, those biases are, they are going to be in that, right? One thing that we have at least like understood in our pursuit of building these foundational models is that you can get a lot of synthetic data generated, right? And you can gather a lot of like contextual data which is missing, right? So these models start performing more contextually once they have seen this kind of a data. The opportunity with synthetic data is also to debias, right? So if you are thinking about like that my data had like unbalanced samples and that's why it's like tilting towards one thing, what you could do is you could balance it out with synthetic data and things like that, right? So again, these are some things that we are learning in our own pursuit of building some of these things. But yes, you do need contextual data that the understanding of which only like a particular geography would have, and that's why they are best placed to sort of gather and train or improve on existing open source model or build from scratch, depending on the choice. But I think fundamentally it is still a pursuit of sovereignty, right? That I still need to be in control of something that's going to become a fundamental use technology tomorrow, right? It's very, very general purpose, and that's why the ability to have full stack control over it is very, very critical.
Okay, I saw 3 hands up, maybe 4 or 5. We don't have the time to answer all these questions. So what I would do is, because I really think that it'll be good to hear the reflections from the room. So if you could just get mics across to folks, there's a mic there. Make your question or comment really brief so that we can get as many as possible. No expectations to answer everything, but let's just get as many of them. Just stand up, introduce yourself so we know who you are. Whoever is got their hands up. Yeah. I think that, yeah. Just introduce yourself and as briefly as possible. Like if you're on a timer, how quickly can you get it?
Sure. Am I audible? I hope I'm. So I am Bhavisha Pandit. I am a senior generative AI engineer from IBM. To set up context very quickly, I am a pro open source person. I have built a lot of large language model based applications using open source tools, of course, from IBM and from Meta models. So I'm just going to play the devil's advocate over here. So a lot of large language models that are being released can significantly run on very simple hardware. We do not really have to have complex hardware. We do not have to invest a lot of money on hardwares. A lot of Meta models that have been released, I think, can run on smartphones as well, right? So in a scenario like that, we give people or developers the opportunity, some set of developers the opportunity to use it not in the right manner. So how is open source community regulating that? Would developers be regulated as well? Should we expect something like some social security number thing for developers so that, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, so that these things are not used in the wrong way.
Okay, so traceability of developers, that's a good concept. Just behind him. I'm going to try and get, Rudy, I can do a few, right? Where Rudy's gone. Yeah? Okay, so let's just get, I'll try and summarize it and then see if there are questions. Yeah, I know you've got a mic, but I'm just going to get them. Yeah.
Hi, Jeremy from the United States. I work on democracy and tech issues. Suppose in 2030, the US imposes export controls on open source models. Suppose the Indian startup ecosystem knows that now. What would you do now with that knowledge that you are not currently doing?
I think Saurabh's going to say we've already started building our own model, but in case this is going to shut down, what would we do? How will we become self-reliant?
Hi, I'm Akhil from the National Health Authority. So my question is regarding the definition of open source AI itself, because I think open source code is very familiar, wherein you can replicate the code and it's the same. But I don't think open source AI is similar. Just alluding to what Saurabh said, are we talking about weights or the data sets or both combined? Because you can arrive at those weights using different data sets too. That's statistically possible. So considering that, and with the compute being the limiting factor here, let's say the global north has developed a model and we have those weights, but we are deploying it in the global south and we don't know how it's going to respond or the bias itself. So how do I, and also regulation, we can have export controls, but considering these weights, can we actually stop it? So what should our defense be in the sense that, because many people will think this is a form of colonialism again, wherein the models come and then the bias also comes with them. Is there something that we can do to actually beware and do something?
Yeah, so colonialism. Okay, there's a question there. There's a question. Yeah, if you can just, I think it's working. It'll just.
Okay. So, hi, my name is Kaushik Bhattacharya. I work for Tata. So my question is actually two things. First of all, we've been hearing a lot about Digital India Act and all these things. If someone can throw some light around that. And second
Nothing.
thing.
There's no, I mean, no one's seen this. It's a myth. But yeah, just.
Sure. Even that is also an answer. And second question is that we deal with a lot of complexity and we believe in design-led development. So I want to understand your perspective, how design can play, some of the roles in solving some of the complexities and diversities and
design
challenges.
I just want to turn to the panel. Is there anything that you want to respond to? Just let me know, because I think there's value in even listening to the room. Yeah.
We are discussing a very important subject, that is Global South and AI. What policy interventions are needed to ensure that the Global South gets the full benefits of AI? Thank you.
Okay, there's another question there.
It's not actually a question. I am Manikandan. I'm an engineer from Madurai. I'm into analyzing whatever man has done so far and what is sustainable, what is optimization. The quantum theories can explain everything. And artificial intelligence is not sustainable because technology is sustainable, economy is not sustainable because resources of nature, man has no absolute right over all the resources within his perception. Man assumes that he owns all the resources, but it is combined with technology, so it becomes not sustainable. One anomaly is we have the best infrastructure in Bangalore, we have the best designed cars in the world. But still, it takes 3 hours to reach Bangalore airport.
Yeah, but can you just tell us what the comment is in the context of open source AI?
90% of what artificial intelligence is not sustainable. We have
So resource.
Semiconductor has the property because an atom has an electronic configuration to exhibit semiconductor property. But man assumes that semiconductor is designed for him. No, the nature has designed an atom such that the electronic configuration is man has to align with nature. For example, we can manufacture cars, we can manufacture asphalt, we can manufacture bitumen, but we cannot manufacture land. That is why Bangalore we have 3 hours traffic. It will worse only. People think so many things. No, Bangalore can have only this much infrastructure and only this many vehicles can be accommodated in this.
Fully taken on board.
Yes.
So thanks.
90% of what man's approach to is not sustainable.
Okay,
including economy.
Can I move to maybe the last two questions? Amlan, you've been hogging the mics. I'm going to allow you to. It's like an inside kind of a thing. So okay.
No, just
want to link it back to the DPI conversation, right? So what's the experience from DPI adoption in the Global South that you can use to inform the adoption of global open source AI in the Global South? Two parts, right? Love to hear your comments on consumer protection and grievance redressal, and two is on responsibility and liability. We heard on day one from the builders of UPI that if they had to go back in time and redesign one aspect of it, they would focus on grievance redressal, right? Given the scale of adoption, millions of potentially billions, right? So what would we redesign about, consumer protection, but not safety in general, grievance redressal specifically, given the adoption of open source AI? And two is on responsibility and potentially liability. You're looking at multi-party, value chains, developer, deployer. Where do we place that liability? ONDC, an example of that. If we go down the path, Melinda, you suggested, deployers responsible primarily, is that going to have a chilling effect on application development and this, use case capital of the world ambition that we have?
So I had a liability question. I decided not to ask it, but Urvashi, do you have one last question? And I want to see if there's just if you want to pick any of these things up and respond so that we can wind it up. You should just work out of the back, yeah.
Just a quick question now. I was keen to know the panelists' response to Melinda's suggestion that we should rethink data protection regulation and rethink principles such as data minimization, etc., so we can serve AI innovations. I'd love to know if anyone has any reactions to that.
I can say yes, we should rethink. Okay, anything that you guys want to take? We'll just do a very quick rapid fire, or if not, we can just say it's dinner and we can leave.
I think policy interventions for the global South, there are a couple, there are many, but a couple that I would highlight. One is, I think there's really a lot of need for coordination and collaboration within the countries themselves, and also between the countries, right? Because we are at a disadvantaged position, and therefore we should really work together to get around some of the issues that we face on readiness and things like that. Secondly, on regulatory framework, I think that what you had mentioned on consumer protection, for instance, that I would like to link back into how, for instance, the Malaysian consumer protection regulatory framework actually doesn't cover like class action. There's no collective redress. So this is an example of how the regulatory environment is not actually good enough for the potential bias and discrimination problems that we might have where you rely on one individual to take discrimination up. Yeah.
Is that on? I'll try and answer your last question. I think that it may be appropriate to look at data regulation and how it works as suggested. I think that it's high time that look comes from people who are demonstrably solving public policy problems at scale rather than, and this is no point of meta, but rather than a culture that's in the last 18 months moved us from the singularity to mass extinction as a spectrum of activity, which seems to me a little bit far-fetched. So I think it's high time that maybe the Global South stepped into that and looked at those data practices in the way that serves your needs best.
It's always a sign of a good panel discussion when there are more questions unanswered than answered. Thank you very much for being a full house all the way to the end, and I think dinner is served.
Hello. Thank you very much to the panelists for that very insightful discussion. My name is Shatak, I work at Carnegie. If you can just hold on for 2-3 minutes. Thank you everyone for attending the Global Tech Summit Innovation Dialogue. This is the first time we're doing it, and we did it in Bangalore. We want to stay in touch with all of you going forward. We are, of course, thankful to our partners for supporting us. Before we wrap up, there's a 2 to 3 minute short video for which we'd like you to stay in the room and watch it before we leave.
Today we have 50 million small merchants who take UPI payments.
We have one people and one destiny, which is what we aspire for.
When countries want to build, they will build, not necessarily in the optimal ways of how to build.
400 million people who are actively transacting on UPI using their bank accounts are creating rich data history about themselves.
Preserving and improving society's social fabric, making the whole system beneficial for individuals, communities.
New players can emerge, and if they have a better product, they can get market share.
I thought this day was fantastic. It was great to really unpack what it means for markets to play a role in the DPI adoption journey.
A wise person once told me that even if technology firms are not interested in geopolitics, geopolitics are certainly very interested in technology.
Unless you have a collaborative conversation, the intelligence across as a network will not emerge. There is no one right answer for everyone.
And the quote of the day for me was, what works at scale is different from scaling what works.
That requires CITE, competition, innovation, transparency, and empathy. That's the answer to all tech policy problems, by the way.
Dialogues like this have a way of convening multiple perspectives as well as stakeholders.
I think this has been a fantastic start. Huge kudos and congratulations to Carnegie India for being able to pull such a tremendous event together.
DPI is kind of a way of doing digital transformation that puts the citizen at the center of the transformation.
Bringing together representatives from the government, from the private sector involved in these technologies was really a very, very fruitful interaction.
Learning from each other and sort of taking the best from what has worked in the different countries.